The
Get your
boardroom
hands
was a
off me. This is a
cathedral of
mistake.
glass and silence,
You need to
50
come with us
stories
now.
above
It's over,
Manhattan,
Daniel.
where the city stretched out like a glittering promise beneath the morning sun. Catherine Morrison stood at the head of the obsidian table, and for the first time in 3 years, she was not invisible. Behind her, 3 women formed a constellation of quiet power. To her left stood a woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled into an elegant knot, eyes that had seen empires rise and fall and had chosen to rise with them. To her right, a young Latina with fire in her gaze and a tablet clutched against her chest like armor. Her youth a reminder that revolution came in all ages. And beside the door, arms crossed with the satisfaction of a general surveying one territory, a woman whose very presence commanded respect without demanding it, whose stern face hid a heart that had known its own betrayals and survivals. Across the table, David Sterling sat in his bespoke suit, his face the color of ash, his world collapsing around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. He stared at Catherine with the confused horror of a man who had just realized he had created his own destroyer, that the woman he had dismissed as nothing had become the instrument of his downfall. Her voice, when it came, was silk over steel, each word chosen with the precision of a translator who knew that language could build or destroy. "You didn't destroy me, David. You taught me who I really am." The words hung in the air between them, a verdict and a benediction. And in that moment, Catherine Morrison understood that this was not the beginning of her story. It was the middle. The end was still being written, and for the first time since the world had burned around her, she held the pen. She was the author now, not the victim, not the ghost, the author. But to understand how she arrived here, in this fortress of glass with these women at her back and justice finally in her hands, you would need to go back. Back to when she was whole, back to when she trusted, back to a Sunday evening in Brooklyn when the autumn light painted everything gold and she still believed that brilliance was its own protection, that competence was armor, that being good at what you did meant the world would be fair. 3 years earlier, the Morrison family brownstone in Brooklyn Heights smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, of apple pie cooling on the windowsill, of all the small rituals that make a house a home and a family, something sacred. Catherine sat at the dining table that had belonged to her grandparents, the table where she had done homework and eaten birthday cakes, and heard the stories of her father's childhood in this very house, watching her mother move through the kitchen with the easy grace of a woman who had made this meal 1,000 times and would make it 1,000 more. Grace Morrison was 63 years old and had the kind of beauty that time refined rather than diminished. Her hands, strong from years of grading papers and pointing at chalkboards, now arranged dishes with the precision of a surgeon, each movement economical and sure. She had been a high school English teacher for 32 years before retiring, and she still corrected Catherine's grammar with the gentle insistence of someone who believed words mattered more than most people knew, that language was civilization's great gift and its great responsibility. She had been teaching when Catherine's father had his heart attack, had been in her classroom reading Dickens to her juniors, when the school nurse had come to tell her that John Morrison had collapsed in his law office, that the ambulance was already there, that she needed to come now. Catherine had been 26, finishing her doctorate at Georgetown when the call came. By the time she made it to the hospital, he was gone, just gone. A man who had been healthy and vibrant and full of plans, taken by a heart that had simply stopped beating at 58. They had buried him in the cemetery where 3 generations of Morrisons lay, and Grace had stood by the grave in her black dress and held Catherine's hand and said, "He was so proud of you. He called you his little polyglot. He loved that you could speak to the world in the world's languages." That had been 5 years ago. 5 years of Grace living alone in this brownstone, tending her garden, volunteering at the library, building a life around the absence where her husband used to be. She rarely spoke of him, not because the grief had faded, but because speaking it out loud made it fresh again. And she had learned to carry her sorrow quietly, with dignity, the way she carried everything. "You're working too hard again," Grace said now, not looking up from the green beans she was plating. It was not a question. It was the kind of statement mothers made when they had known you since before you could speak, when they could read exhaustion in the set of your shoulders and loneliness in the things you didn't say and fear in the silences between your words. Catherine smiled, the kind of smile that said her mother was right, but that she would not slow down anyway. There's a peace summit next week, me. The Balkan situation. They specifically requested me. The ambassador said I was the only translator who could handle the diplomatic nuances in Russian and Serbian simultaneously. Grace set down the serving spoon and looked at her daughter with eyes that saw everything, eyes that could read the pride Catherine tried to hide, the small fear that she wasn't enough, the loneliness that came from spending all your time with words instead of people. When was the last time you went on a date? When was the last time you did something just for joy, not for achievement? I'm married to my career. Careers don't keep you warm at night, sweetheart. Your father used to say that work was what you did between the moments that mattered, the moments with people you loved. Don't forget to have those moments. Catherine laughed, a sound that filled the kitchen like light, and for a moment, she was not Dr. Catherine Morrison, simultaneous interpreter for the United Nations, holder of a doctorate from Georgetown, fluent in 10 languages and rising. She was just Kat, Grace's daughter, sitting in the house where she had grown up, where her father had taught her to read before she started kindergarten, using books in 3 different languages, because he believed children could learn anything if you made it a game, where the wall still held the echoes of a childhood that had been, by any measure, blessed. I'm happy, me, I promise. And it was true. At 31, Catherine Morrison had everything she had worked for. Her dissertation on polysynthetic languages had been called groundbreaking, had been published in 3 academic journals, had opened doors she had only dreamed of. She was the youngest simultaneous interpreter the United Nations had ever hired. She moved seamlessly between Mandarin and Russian, Arabic and German, Japanese and French, catching nuances that machine translation missed, understanding not just words but intent, culture, the unspoken language beneath the language, the silence between syllables that sometimes mattered more than the syllables themselves. She had the ear of ambassadors. She had the respect of academics. She had a career that mattered, that made a difference, that proved every hour she had spent hunched over textbooks and audio recordings and the subtle music of human communication had been worth it. She was making her father proud, even if he wasn't here to see it, especially because he wasn't here to see it. She was living the life he had imagined for her. Grace studied her daughter's face, reading it the way she had once read Dickens and Austen to her students, looking for the truth beneath the surface, the subtext that people often didn't know they were revealing. Finally, she nodded. Just remember, baby, success is sweet, but it's sweeter when you have someone to share it with. Don't wait too long. Don't wake up at 63 and realize you spent your whole life achieving instead of living. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand, feeling the familiar geography of her mother's fingers, the wedding ring Grace still wore even though John had been gone for 5 years. I know, me. I know. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know as she sat in that warm kitchen with the smell of pie and the weight of her mother's love surrounding her like a blanket, was that in less than a week, everything would begin to unravel. The career she had built stone by stone would collapse. The reputation she had earned word by word would burn. And the person she trusted most in the world, the colleague she called friend, the man who had brought her coffee every morning for 6 months, would be the one holding the match. His name was David Sterling, and he had arrived at the State Department's Linguistic Division 6 months after Catherine, already armed with degrees from Yale and a smile that could make you forget he had come in second place. Second to Catherine in every evaluation, every assignment, every commendation. Second, always second, and slowly learning to hate the woman who made him feel that way. They had been paired together from the beginning, the 2 brightest stars in a constellation of talented translators. Morning coffee became a ritual. Catherine brought the linguistics puzzles she loved, those beautiful tangles of grammar and meaning that most people would find tedious, but that lit her up from the inside, that made her feel the way some people felt about music or mathematics or the perfect movement of a chess piece. David brought lattes from the cafe on the corner, always remembering that she took hers with oat milk and a whisper of vanilla, always arriving with that smile that said he was happy to see her, that their partnership meant something to him. Late nights at the translation desk, working through encrypted documents and diplomatic cables, became something more than work. They became a partnership. David would make her laugh when the bureaucracy threatened to crush her spirit, when the endless meetings and policy reviews made her forget why she loved language in the first place. She would challenge him when he took intellectual shortcuts, pushing him to be better, sharper, more precise, because she believed in his potential even when he doubted himself. He was charming in the way that good-looking men often are, with dark hair that fell just so and eyes that crinkled when he smiled, that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he focused on you. He wore his ambition openly, talked about rising through the ranks, about one day running the entire division, about being the youngest deputy secretary for languages in State Department history. Catherine admired that about him. She had never been good at wanting power. She just wanted to be excellent at what she did. She wanted to be useful. She wanted languages to build bridges instead of walls. What she didn't see, what she missed entirely because she was focused on verb conjugations and syntactic structures and the endless, fascinating complexity of human language, was the way David looked at her when she wasn't watching. The way his smile tightened when she received praise he thought should have been his. The way he made excuses to touch her shoulder, to sit too close, to create moments of intimacy that she, in her obliviousness, treated as nothing more than friendly warmth, as the natural affection between colleagues who respected each other. She didn't see the resentment building like pressure in a sealed container. Didn't see the way his jaw clenched when their supervisor called her translation of a Russian diplomatic memo flawless while his was merely good. Didn't notice how he stopped bringing her coffee when she was promoted to lead interpreter for the Security Council meetings. Didn't understand that his friendship had conditions, that it required her to stay in her place, that it depended on him being at least equal if not superior. The conversation happened on a Tuesday in May, in the small kitchen area where they made their afternoon tea. Rain streaked the windows, turning the world outside into watercolor, blurring the boundaries between earth and sky. David had brought her favorite cookies, the ones from the bakery in Georgetown that cost too much but tasted like childhood, like her father taking her there after gymnastics practice when she was 8. "What if we were more than colleagues?" he said, and the question hung in the air between them like smoke, like something that would dissipate if you didn't grab it quickly enough. Catherine looked up from the tea she was steeping, genuinely confused. They were colleagues. They were friends. What else was there? "We are more than colleagues, David. We're friends. We're partners." "That's not what I mean." His voice was soft, vulnerable, and she saw it then. The hope in his eyes, the expectation, the assumption that she would say yes because why wouldn't she? He was handsome, he was smart, he was offering her something. She saw it then, finally. The hope in his eyes, the vulnerability beneath the confidence, the way he was holding his breath, waiting for her answer, so certain of what it would be that he had already started planning what would come next. And in that moment, she felt the kind of sadness that comes when you realize you are about to hurt someone without meaning to, that there is no way to say no that won't wound. "David." Her voice was gentle, the way you speak to something fragile, the way her mother had spoken to her when her father died, soft and careful, like the wrong word might shatter everything. "You're like a brother to me. You're my best friend here, but I don't feel that way about you. I'm sorry, I just don't." He flinched. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but she saw it, saw the hope die like a candle snuffed out, saw something else slide into its place, something harder and colder that she would not recognize until much later, as the seed of her destruction, as the moment when friendship curdled into hate. "Of course," he said, and the smile returned, practiced and perfect, the mask sliding back into place. "Just checking. Can't blame a guy for trying, right?" He laughed, and she laughed with him, relieved that the awkwardness had passed, that their friendship was intact, that this moment wouldn't ruin what they had built together. She squeezed his arm affectionately, a gesture meant to reassure, meant to say we're still okay, and went back to her desk, back to the memo she was translating from Russian to English, back to the work that made sense when human relationships sometimes did not. What she didn't see was David standing alone in that kitchen, the smile falling from his face like a mask dropped into water. She didn't see his hands clench so tight his knuckles went white. She didn't see the moment when hurt curdled into something darker, something that whispered she thought she was too good for him, that she had humiliated him, that she needed to be taught that brilliance meant nothing if you didn't have the power to protect it. She didn't see him make a decision that would change both their lives forever, because David Sterling was the kind of man who could not bear to lose. Not a job, not a competition, not a promotion, and certainly not to a woman who had rejected him with kindness, which was somehow worse than if she had been cruel. Cruelty he could have answered with anger. Kindness made him feel small, made him feel pathetic. And small, pathetic men do terrible things to make themselves feel large again. The Kovalchuk memo arrived on Catherine's desk on a Friday afternoon in late summer. It was marked with the highest level of security clearance, encrypted in Russian, flagged as urgent and time-sensitive. The subject line read, "Proposed terms for Ukrainian peace summit, confidential, eyes only." Catherine had translated hundreds of such documents. Thousands. This was her job. This was what she was brilliant at. She worked through the memo with her usual meticulous care, catching every nuance, every diplomatic hedge, every word that meant something different than what it appeared to mean on the surface, every phrase that was code for something else, every silence that spoke volumes. The memo detailed proposed terms for a peace summit, concessions that various parties were willing to make, red lines that could not be crossed, the delicate architecture of diplomacy that kept wars from starting or helped them end. When she finished, she sent it up the chain of command, the same way she always did, following protocol that had become as automatic as breathing. She attached her translation, her notes on cultural context, her assessment of tone and intent. She marked it urgent. She sent it to her supervisor. She went home proud of the work she had done, knowing that her translation might help bring peace to a region that had seen too much blood, too much suffering. She made herself dinner, called her mother to check in, hearing Grace's voice talk about the garden and the library book club, and the ordinary, beautiful details of a life well lived. She fell asleep with a linguistics journal open on her chest, an article about the evolution of Slavic verb aspects, content in the knowledge that she was good at what she did, that she was making a difference. 1 week later, her world ended. The memo leaked to the press. Not the sanitized version that might have been released through official channels, not the carefully edited summary that protected sensitive information, but the raw, unfiltered diplomatic communication, complete with unflattering assessments of various world leaders and negotiating positions that were meant to remain private, language that made allies look like fools and enemies look like victims. The peace summit collapsed before it began. Accusations flew across international borders like missiles. Relationships that had taken years to build shattered overnight. And the investigation, swift and merciless, pointed directly at one person, Dr. Catherine Morrison. The evidence was damning in its simplicity, in its completeness, in the way it told a story that made perfect sense if you didn't know the truth. The digital signature on the leaked document matched her workstation. The password used to access the encrypted file was her mother's maiden name, Brennan, information that was in her personnel file but that only someone close to her would think to use. The timestamp corresponded exactly with her shift, with the hour when she had been alone in the office, when no one else had been there to witness what she did or didn't do. She was brought into a hearing room that smelled of fear and furniture polish and the accumulated weight of bureaucracy, faced by people she had worked with, people she had thought respected her, people whose faces were now closed and cold and already convinced of her guilt. They asked her questions in voices that had already decided she was guilty, voices that said they were disappointed, that they had expected better, that her father would have been ashamed. They showed her evidence she could not refute because it existed, because someone had been very careful, because the trap had been laid with precision and patience. They showed her the digital trail, the password log, the timestamp, the leaked document with her translation attached, her name in the metadata like a signature on a confession. "I was framed," she said, and heard how desperate it sounded, How exactly like something a guilty person would say. I would never do this. You know me. You know I would never betray my country, never compromise a peace process, never use my access for personal gain or political purposes. Someone is setting me up. Do you have any proof? They asked, their voices tired, like they had heard this defense 1,000 times before. She did not. She had no proof. Just her word against the evidence, just her character against the facts, just her desperation against their certainty. The tribunal lasted 3 days. 3 days of questions and accusations and evidence presented like stones being stacked, each one adding to the weight that would crush her. 3 days of watching her career dissolve, of seeing respect turn to suspicion, of feeling the future she had built crumble like sand. On the third day, David Sterling took the stand. He looked at her across that room, and she searched his face for some sign of the friend she thought she knew, the person who had shared coffee and cookies and late nights and laughter, the colleague who had been her partner. I wanted to believe in her, David said, his voice heavy with practiced regret, with the careful sadness of someone performing grief. But the evidence is clear. I've worked with Catherine for 6 months. I've seen her become increasingly stressed, increasingly isolated. I've noticed her staying late, working alone. I've seen her act strangely around sensitive materials. It was David who had discovered the breach, David who had compiled the evidence, David who had, with tears in his eyes that might have been real because people could cry when they were winning too, testified that he had seen Catherine acting strangely in the days before the leak, that she had seemed distracted, troubled, not quite herself, that he had tried to talk to her but she had pushed him away. Catherine sat in that hearing room and felt something crack inside her chest. Not just her career dying, not just her reputation burning, but the deeper, more fundamental break that comes when you realize that the person you trusted most in the world had betrayed you, that the friendship you cherished had been a facade, that you had been a fool, that you had believed in someone who had never believed in you. The verdict came down like a hammer on an anvil, final and irreversible. Her security clearance was revoked. Her position was terminated, effective immediately. Her name was added to a blacklist that ensured she would never work in government or international organizations again. Her academic credentials, once a source of pride, became worthless overnight. Doors that had been opened slammed shut. Opportunities vanished like smoke. The brilliant future she had built stone by stone evaporated like morning fog in sunlight. And 2 weeks after her firing, David Sterling was promoted to her position. The position she had earned. The position she had deserved. 6 months later, he left the State Department for the private sector, for a position at a company called Blackwell Industries, for a salary that Catherine could only imagine, for a life that should have been impossible if he had any conscience, any shame, any recognition of what he had done. She didn't know this at the time. She was too busy falling apart, too busy learning what it felt like when your identity shattered, when the person you thought you were ceased to exist. The first month after the firing, Catherine lived in a fog of disbelief. Surely there had been a mistake. Surely someone would realize. Surely the truth would come out. Justice would prevail. The system would work the way it was supposed to work. She sent emails to former colleagues that went unanswered. She reached out to academic contacts who suddenly couldn't find time for coffee, who had urgent meetings, who promised to call back and never did. She applied for positions that rejected her without interview. Her name now toxic, her reputation destroyed. The second month, she ran out of money. The savings she had carefully built vanished into rent and food. And the lawyer she hired who told her there was nothing to be done, that the evidence was too strong, that fighting would only make it worse. The third month, she moved back into her childhood bedroom in her mother's brownstone. A failure at 31, her Georgetown PhD gathering dust in a box she couldn't bear to unpack. Her 10 languages useless ornaments in a life that had become unrecognizable. She slept in the twin bed where she had slept as a teenager, under the quilt her grandmother had made, and stared at the ceiling and wondered how her father's daughter had fallen so far. Grace never said "I told you so," never mentioned that she had warned Catherine about working too hard, about putting all her eggs in the career basket, about the dangers of having no life outside of work, no relationships to fall back on when work failed you. Instead, Grace made Catherine's favorite meals, the ones from childhood, the mac and cheese with the breadcrumb topping that her father had perfected, the chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings that had been birthday tradition, the chicken soup when Catherine couldn't stop crying. When the grief came in waves so strong, she thought she might drown. "I don't know who I am without my career," Catherine said one night, curled on the couch in the living room where she had once done homework and watched television, and dreamed of changing the world with words. Grace sat beside her, pulled her daughter's head onto her shoulder the way she had when Catherine was small and had scraped her knee or lost a spelling bee or come home crying because kids had made fun of her for speaking Arabic to the Lebanese transfer student. "You're my daughter," Grace said, her voice fierce with love. "You're Catherine. That hasn't changed. That will never change. You are the girl who learned to read in 3 languages before kindergarten. You are the woman who cried when her father died because you loved him so much. You are someone who cares about words because you care about people, because you believe communication can heal. That's who you are. Not your job, not your title. You." But it had changed. Catherine felt it in her bones. The person who had walked into that tribunal was not the person who had walked out. Something essential had been broken, and she didn't know if it could be repaired. She had been a translator, a bridge between languages, between cultures, between people. Now she was nothing, and she didn't know how to build a bridge back to herself. The 4th month, she sold her Georgetown ring, the one she had been so proud of, the one that had cost a semester's worth of waiting tables to afford. She sold it to a pawn shop in Queens for $300, and the man behind the counter didn't ask why her hands were shaking or why she left the shop and stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to believe this was her life now. Grace offered her money. Catherine refused. "I need to stand on my own," she said. Even though she was not standing, she was drowning. She was learning what it felt like to be invisible. The 5th month, she got a job. The Meridian was the kind of restaurant where people with money went to see and be seen, where the wine list read like a financial portfolio and the clientele treated servers like furniture, like part of the decor, present but not present, useful but not human. It occupied the ground floor of a glass tower in Midtown, all white linen and crystal chandeliers, and the quiet hum of power changing hands over plates that cost more than Catherine's weekly salary. She was hired as a server, number 27 on a staff of 30. The irony was not lost on her. She, who had once helped negotiate international treaties, was now asking whether people wanted sparkling or still water. She, who could discuss philosophy in 5 languages, was now reciting specials with a smile that felt like her face might crack. The manager was a woman named Linda Chen, 60 years old with a spine of steel and eyes that missed nothing. She hired Catherine on the spot after a 5-minute interview, which was unusual. Most managers wanted to know why a woman with a PhD was applying for a server position. Ms. Chen simply looked at her application, looked at her face, looked at something in her eyes that recognized pain, and said, "You start tomorrow. Don't be late." Catherine didn't know, in that moment, that Linda Chen had once been a high-powered accountant, that she had been blackballed by her ex-husband's firm when their marriage fell apart after 20 years, that he had been a partner, and she had been made partner too late for her contributions to be protected when the divorce became ugly, that she had rebuilt her life from the ground up and knew exactly what it looked like when someone was trying to survive the unsurvivable. She didn't know that Ms. Chen would become, in her own stern way, a lifeline. The first person Catherine met at the Meridian was Sophia Rodriguez, 22 years old, putting herself through NYU Business School one shift at a time. Sophia had the kind of beauty that came from youth and hope, dark hair pulled into a practical bun, eyes that still believed the world was fundamentally good even when the evidence suggested otherwise, energy that seemed inexhaustible even after 8-hour shifts on aching feet. "You're new," Sophia said, not unkindly, during Catherine's first break. They were standing in the cramped staff room that smelled of stale coffee and ambition and dreams deferred. "Where'd you work before?" Catherine considered lying, considered making up some story that wouldn't invite questions, that wouldn't require explaining how far she had fallen. But there was something open in Sophia's face, something genuine, something that said this young woman might actually care. "Nowhere like this," Catherine said finally. Sophia grinned. "None of us did. Ms. Chen has a thing for hiring overqualified people. I think she likes watching us be humbled by soup service. Keeps us honest." Catherine laughed, surprising herself. It was the first time she had laughed in months, and it felt like muscles she had forgotten how to use, like discovering your voice after laryngitis. "What are you studying?" she asked. "Business, marketing track. I want to teach someday, maybe at community college level. But, gotta pay the bills first. Student loans don't pay themselves." Sophia shrugged with the resilience of someone who had never expected life to be easy. "What about you? What did you do before?" "I was a translator." That's cool. That's cool. How many languages?" Catherine hesitated. This was when people's faces changed, when they became suspicious or intimidated or dismissive, when they decided she was lying or showing off or too strange to befriend. 10. Sophia's eyes went wide. 10? Holy shit, that's amazing. Like actually amazing. Why aren't you doing that now? The question hung in the air. Catherine could have explained, could have told her about David, about the frame up, about how brilliance meant nothing when someone decided to destroy you. But it was too fresh, too raw, and she wasn't ready to hand her pain to a stranger, even one with kind eyes. "Long story," she said finally. Sophia nodded, understanding that some doors were meant to stay closed, at least for now. "Well, if you ever need help with anything, I'm around. This place is intense, but we help each other out. That's how we survive." "Thank you." Also, pro tip, never let table 12 see you're annoyed. They tip great, but they're handsy. Just smile and step back. And table 7, the big round one in the back, that's for VIPs only. Ms. Chen assigns those. They're usually billionaires or politicians or people having affairs. Don't ask questions, don't make eye contact unless spoken to. Just serve and disappear. It was such a small thing, this practical advice from a girl young enough to be Catherine's little sister. But it felt like grace, like someone seeing her and offering help without needing to know the whole story, like maybe she wasn't completely alone. Over the next weeks, Sophia became something like a friend. She was bright and hopeful in a way that reminded Catherine of who she used to be, before cynicism had set in, before betrayal had taught her that trust was dangerous. During their breaks, Sophia would talk about her classes, about the marketing paper she was writing, about her dreams of opening her own consulting firm someday, about helping Latino businesses navigate marketing in a world that often ignored them. One evening, Catherine found Sophia in the staff room, staring at her laptop with the kind of despair that usually accompanied bad news or impossible deadlines. "What's wrong?" Catherine asked. "This essay, it's due tomorrow and I can't make it work. The professor wants analysis of market segmentation strategies and I don't know if I'm saying it right. I don't know if I'm smart enough for this." Catherine looked over her shoulder, read the first few paragraphs. They were good, better than good, full of insight and original thinking. But the structure was tangled and the thesis needed sharpening and the language could be more precise. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the laptop. For the next hour they worked together. Catherine showed Sophia how to reorganize her arguments, how to make each paragraph build toward the next, how to sharpen her language until it cut clean and true. It was the first time in months she had used her mind for something other than remembering wine vintages and table numbers, and it felt like coming back to life, like blood returning to a numb limb. "Why would you help me?" Sophia asked when they finished. Her essay transformed from good to excellent. "You don't even know me." Catherine considered the question. Why had she helped? Because Sophia had been kind when she didn't have to be. Because helping felt like being useful again. Because in teaching Sophia, she had remembered that she was still capable of something beyond service. "Because someone should," she said finally, and meant it. After that, it became a pattern. Sophia would bring her assignments during breaks, and Catherine would help her untangle them, never doing the work for her, but guiding her toward clarity, toward the best version of her own thinking. And in return, Sophia shared her youth, her optimism, her unshakable belief that things could get better, that falling down didn't mean staying down. "You're too smart to be here," Sophia said one night as they folded napkins in the quiet after close. "Smart didn't save me," Catherine replied. "Not yet," Sophia said, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly broken. "But it will. Ms. Chen noticed their friendship with approval. One evening, as Catherine was polishing wine glasses until her reflection, distorted and fragmented, was all she could see, Ms. Chen appeared beside her like a ghost. Morrison. Yes, ma'am? You're good at this work. Efficient, professional, but you're too smart for it. I can see it. The way you translate the menu for foreign customers without being asked. The way you correct the sommelier's French pronunciation under your breath. The way you read people, anticipate what they need before they know they need it. Catherine looked up, surprised. Ms. Chen never gave compliments, never revealed anything personal, never crossed the line between manager and employee. I was an accountant once, Ms. Chen continued, her voice neutral, giving away nothing but facts. 20 years at a firm in Manhattan, made partner. Then I married the wrong man and divorced him, and suddenly my expertise wasn't needed anymore. Blackballed, finished. 15 years I've been managing this restaurant when I should be a CFO somewhere. Catherine's hand stilled on the glass. This was confession. This was trust. I see you, Morrison. I know what it looks like when someone's rebuilding from rubble. You keep your head down, you do the work, and one day when you're ready, you'll rise again. But until then, you survive. You do what you have to do, and you don't let them make you forget who you are. It was the longest speech Catherine had ever heard Ms. Chen make. The older woman didn't wait for a response, just walked away, leaving Catherine alone with the wine glasses and the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time since her world had ended. At night, in her small studio apartment in Queens that she had scraped together enough money to rent after 6 months of living with her mother, Catherine kept a wall. On that wall were newspaper clippings about David Sterling, printouts from LinkedIn, photos from industry events. She tracked him the way a hunter tracks prey, learning his patterns, his promotions, his steady rise through the ranks of Blackwell Industries, trying to understand how he could smile in photographs when he had destroyed someone's life, trying to find evidence of guilt or shame or conscience. Sophia discovered the wall when she came over one Sunday, bringing Thai food and the determination to make sure Catherine had at least one meal that didn't come from the restaurant or a microwave. She stopped in the doorway, taking in the collage of David's life, the careful organization, the notes in Catherine's handwriting, the timeline that tracked every promotion and achievement. Cat, she said quietly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. This is intense. Are you okay? Catherine stood in her tiny kitchen, looking at what Sophia was seeing. The evidence of 3 years spent unable to let go. The proof that she was stuck in the past like an insect in amber, like someone who had stopped living and started only surviving and seeking revenge. He destroyed my life, she said, and heard how it sounded, obsessive, unstable. Exactly like someone who might have actually leaked that memo. I need to understand why. I need to know how someone I trusted could do that to me. Sophia set down the food, came to stand beside her. Or maybe you need to let go and build a new life. Maybe you need to stop giving him power over you. Because this wall, this obsession, it's keeping you trapped. You're his prisoner. And he doesn't even know it. I can't let go. Why not? Catherine turned to face her, and for the first time said it out loud. Because if I let go, it means he wins. It means what he did to me doesn't matter. It means I was nothing. It means my father's daughter, my mother's hope, everything I worked for, everything I was, meant nothing. I can't let it mean nothing. Sophia pulled her into a hug. This girl who was young enough to be naive, but wise enough to recognize pain when she saw it. You're not nothing, Sophia said fiercely. You're my friend. You're brilliant. You're kind. You help me with my homework. You make everyone's job easier. You're the best translator who ever lived. And one day, I think you're going to make him regret what he did. But Kat, don't let revenge eat you alive before you get the chance. Don't let him take any more from you than he already has. Catherine held on to her, this unexpected sister, and let herself be comforted even though she knew Sophia was wrong about one thing. She was already being eaten alive. The only question was whether she would have anything left when the meal was done, whether revenge would leave enough of her to matter. Ms. Chen assigned her to table 7 on a Thursday in late autumn, 3 years after her life had burned down. 3 years of invisible service and silent rage, and the slow erosion of the person she used to be. Table 7 was the worst assignment at the Meridian. It was the large circular booth in the back, shrouded in alcoves designed for privacy and power. It was where men made deals that moved markets and destroyed lives. It was where servers were invisible by design, where wealth assumed everyone else was deaf and dumb and beneath notice. "Blackwell party tonight," Ms. Chen said during the pre-service meeting, her voice carrying across the staff room. Everyone shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the name. Marcus Blackwell was a private equity titan, the kind of man who dismantled companies the way other people did crossword puzzles. He was notorious for his brutal negotiations, his icy charisma, his complete contempt for anyone he considered beneath him, which was everyone who didn't have at least 8 figures in the bank. "Morrison, you're on primary." Catherine's stomach dropped. She had served difficult tables. She had dealt with entitled clients and casual cruelty. But Blackwell had a reputation that preceded him. He was the kind of customer who could get you fired with a word, who expected perfection and punished anything less. "Yes, ma'am. No mistakes," Ms. Chen said. But her eyes said something else. Something like, "You can handle this." Something like, "This is a test." Something like, "Show them who you really are." Sophia caught her at the staff room afterward, worry written across her face. "Be careful tonight. Rich men like that eat people like us. They don't see us as human. Just be invisible and you'll be fine." "I'm invisible," Catherine said, and meant it. "I've had 3 years of practice. I'll be fine." What she didn't say was that she had learned to be invisible, had perfected it over 3 years, had made it her armor and her survival strategy. She was a ghost polishing the gilded cages of the elite. She was there to serve and disappear, never causing ripples, never being remembered, never mattering. During her break, she heard Tommy the bartender mention Blackwell Industries to a coworker. Something about a major deal pending, something about international partners. The name triggered something in her memory, something from her obsessive research. She pulled out her phone in the bathroom, hands shaking with sudden intuition, and searched. David Sterling, Vice President of Acquisition. Blackwell Industries. The phone nearly slipped from her fingers. The world tilted. The man who had destroyed her, the man who had stolen her career and her reputation and 3 years of her life, worked for tonight's guest, was employed by the billionaire she was about to serve soup to. The man whose business card probably sat in David's wallet right now. Catherine braced herself against the sink, staring at her reflection in the fluorescent bathroom light. She looked older than 34. The last 3 years had carved lines around her eyes, had stolen the easy confidence she used to wear like a second skin, had taught her that the world was not fair, and brilliance was not protection, and trust was a weapon people used against you. She could call in sick. She could walk out. She could avoid this collision between her past and her present. But she had spent 3 years tracking David's career, learning his patterns, trying to understand why he had hated her enough to destroy her. And now, by some twist of fate or divine intervention or simple probability, his world was about to intersect with hers. She straightened her uniform, smoothed her apron, and made a decision. She would work the table. She would be invisible. And maybe, just maybe, she would learn something useful, some weakness, some opportunity, some way to make him pay. She called her mother from the bathroom, because some habits die hard, because Grace's voice was still the thing that grounded her when the world felt too sharp. "Me," she said when Grace answered. "David works for tonight's client, the VIP. I'm serving his boss." There was a pause, and Catherine could picture her mother in the brownstone kitchen, setting down whatever she was doing, giving Catherine her full attention the way she always had, the way she had when Catherine called from the hospital to say Dad was gone. "Come home, sweetheart. Don't do this to yourself. Don't torture yourself with proximity to him. I have to know why he did it, and maybe this is my chance to find something, some way to fight back, some way to matter again. Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." "I love you, baby. Your father would be proud of you, of how you've survived, of how you haven't given up even when giving up would have been easier. I love you too, me." Catherine hung up and looked at herself one more time in the mirror. Her reflection looked back, a woman who had fallen and survived the fall, who had learned to be invisible because visibility had destroyed her, who had forgotten how to hope, but who still remembered how to endure. Tonight, She would serve Marcus Blackwell and his associates. She would be perfect and forgettable. She would do her job and go home and add whatever she learned to the wall in her apartment. She had no expectations beyond that. No dreams of confrontation or justice or revenge. Just another night at the Meridian. Another table full of powerful men who would never see her as human. The dining room opened at 7. The low hum of conversation began. The delicate music of wealth and power and casual cruelty. Catherine moved through her section with practiced grace, a ballet she had performed hundreds of times. She delivered amuse-bouches with a smile that reached her eyes because she had learned that tips depended on warmth even when you felt nothing. She refilled water glasses without being asked. She described the Norwegian halibut with the kind of detail that made people feel sophisticated for ordering it. At 8:03, the temperature in the room dropped. Marcus Blackwell had arrived. He didn't walk through the door so much as he claimed it, as he conquered it, as he reminded everyone that this was his world and they were just living in it. Tall, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Catherine's annual salary, with a watch that glinted in the candlelight like captured stars. He dismissed the hostess with barely a glance, the kind of man so accustomed to deference that he had forgotten it was a gift and not a right. Behind him came 3 men. One was severe, German, all sharp angles and colder eyes. Another was Japanese, watchful and precise, every movement calculated. The third was Russian, bear-like and jovial, but with the kind of joviality that could turn into violence without warning. They moved toward table 7 like generals to a war room, and the other diners noticed, shifting in their seats, lowering their voices as if in the presence of something dangerous, something that could hurt them if they weren't careful. Ms. Chen caught Catherine's eye from across the room. Now, Morrison, perfect service, not a single mistake. Catherine smoothed her apron, picked up her silver tray, and walked toward table 7, toward Marcus Blackwell and his associates, toward the men who would never know that the woman serving their water spoke 10 languages and had once helped negotiate peace, toward the evening that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. She walked toward the lion's den with her head high and her hands steady and her heart quiet, not knowing that in less than 3 hours, she would speak words that would shatter the careful invisibility she had built, not knowing that the ghost she had become was about to remember how to haunt. She walked toward her future, and it looked, in that moment, exactly like her past. Powerful men, silence, the weight of being nothing. But Catherine Morrison had learned something in 3 years of falling and surviving and rebuilding from rubble. She had learned that nothing could be dangerous, that invisible could be powerful, that the most overlooked person in the room was often the one who saw everything, who heard everything, who understood everything while being dismissed as furniture. The men at table 7 had no idea what they were about to face. They thought she was furniture. They thought she was deaf. They thought, as men like them always thought, that a woman serving soup could not possibly matter, could not possibly understand, could not possibly be anything more than a pair of hands bringing food and taking away plates. They had never been more wrong. And somewhere in the universe, in the invisible architecture of justice and fate, and the long arc that bends slowly but inevitably, the scales began, slowly, to tip. The air around table 7 felt different, pressurized, as if the wealth concentrated in that circular booth had somehow altered the atmosphere itself, had changed the laws of physics to make everything heavier, harder, more dangerous. Catherine approached with her silver tray held like a shield, her smile a mask she had perfected over 3 years of being invisible. The 4 men at the table barely registered her presence. To them, she was furniture that happened to breathe, decoration that could fetch wine. Marcus Blackwell sat at the center like a king holding court, his fingers scrolling across his phone with the kind of boredom that came from having too much money and too little that could surprise him anymore. His suit was custom brioni, the fabric so fine it seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. His watch caught the candlelight, a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar that cost more than most people earned in a year, possibly 2 years. He was 48 years old and had the face of a Roman emperor, all sharp angles and cold authority, the face of someone who had been told yes so many times he had forgotten what no sounded like, To his right sat Klaus Hoffmann, the German, severe and precise as a scalpel. His gray hair was cut military short, and his eyes missed nothing even as they dismissed her entirely. He wore his ambition like cologne, heavy and obvious, the kind of man who calculated the value of every interaction before deciding whether to engage. His hands were manicured, his cufflinks platinum, his entire being a testament to control and precision. Across from him, Kenji Nakamura watched the room with the patience of a man who had learned that silence was often more powerful than speech, that the person who spoke first usually lost. He was Japanese, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost as much as Hoffman's, and when he moved, it was with the economy of someone who never wasted energy on unnecessary gestures. His face was a mask of polite neutrality that revealed absolutely nothing about what he was thinking. And at the far end, taking up space like he had bought it and owned it and could demolish it if the mood struck him, was Roman Volkov, Russian, bear-like, with a laugh that filled rooms and eyes that calculated the value of everything they saw. He was the kind of man who thought wealth made him charming when it only made him loud, who confused money with personality, who believed that because he could buy anything, he deserved everything. Catherine set down water glasses with movements so practiced they had become meditation, a ritual that required no thought, just muscle memory, and 3 years of invisible service. Still for Mr. Volkov, sparkling for Mr. Hoffman, still for Mr. Nakamura, and for Mr. Blackwell, whatever he demanded without the inconvenience of having to specify, because men like him expected you to know, expected you to anticipate, expected you to read his mind because your job was to make his life effortless. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice the perfect blend of deference and invisibility, the voice she had cultivated over 3 years of not mattering. "My name is Catherine, and I'll be your server this evening. May I start you with some water for the table?" Volkov beamed at her, his gaze lingering just long enough to make her skin crawl, just long enough to remind her that she was female, and he was male. And in his world, that meant something. Meant he had rights to look, to assess, to imagine. Excellent. Yes, water, please. Still. And for my friends," he gestured expansively, as if he were bestowing gifts, as if ordering water was an act of generosity. Hoffman nodded curtly. "Sparkling." One word, no please, no acknowledgement that she was human enough to deserve basic courtesy. Nakamura gave a slight bow, polite in the way that made his companions seem like barbarians, but politeness that still kept her firmly in her place, that acknowledged her service without acknowledging her humanity. "Still, thank you." Blackwell finally looked up, his arctic blue eyes passing over her like she was weather, like she was a cloud that might produce rain or might not, but either way was not worthy of sustained attention. Not a person, not even interesting weather, just there. "Just bring the menus and a bottle of your most expensive Japanese whiskey, the single malt. Don't ask me which one. You're paid to know." Catherine didn't flinch. She had been dismissed by better men and worse, by ambassadors and academics and bureaucrats who at least had the decency to pretend she mattered when she was translating for them. She had learned that the trick was to let it slide off, to be water instead of stone, to absorb the impact without letting it bruise. "Of course, sir. The Yamazaki 25. An excellent choice." Blackwell's eyes narrowed, just slightly, surprised that she knew, that she was competent, that she might have a brain inside the uniform, that the furniture had opinions about his whiskey. But the moment passed like clouds across the sun, gone before it could mean anything, before he had to reconsider whether she might be worth acknowledging. "Whatever, just be quick." She retreated, a ghost in black and white, and fetched the water, the menus, the bottle of amber liquid that cost more per ounce than she made per hour, that represented weeks of her labor in a single glass. When she returned, the men had already forgotten she existed. They were talking in the way powerful men talk when they think no one who matters is listening, when they've forgotten that the furniture has ears. The conversation was a chaos of languages, English and German and Russian tumbling over each other like a river over rocks, like tributaries joining into something larger and more dangerous. They were discussing a deal, something big, something that made their voices drop, and their eyes gleam with the particular hunger that came from smelling money, from sensing opportunity, from knowing they were about to get richer while someone else got poorer. The key is the access point in the Baltic, Hoffman said in German, his consonants sharp as knives, each word precisely articulated. Without that, the entire bandwidth proposition fails. The infrastructure cannot support the data load. Pavlov assures me the permits are a formality, but I have concerns about the timeline. Catherine poured the whiskey, her hands steady, her face blank, her mind automatically translating every word, every nuance, unable to turn off the skill that had defined her even when it served no purpose, even when no one cared that she understood. Inside, her mind translated automatically, a reflex she could not turn off even after 3 years of trying, even after 3 years of wishing she could just be empty, just be simple, just not understand what was happening around her. She understood every word. She knew what they meant. She knew that permits being a formality meant bribes had been arranged, that officials had been bought, that the legal veneer was just that, a veneer covering corruption. She knew that bandwidth proposition meant technology, probably satellite technology, probably dual-use technology that could serve civilian and military purposes. She knew that the Baltic access point meant Russia and all the complicated geopolitics that came with it, the sanctions and the treaties and the delicate balance of power that men like these treated as obstacles to profit rather than safeguards for peace. Volkov boomed in Russian, expansive and loud, his voice filling the alcove like cigar smoke. A few gifts to the right ministers, and the port is ours. These Europeans, they pretend to be moral, but everyone has a price. Everyone. You just have to find the number that makes them stop caring about their precious regulations. Catherine felt something twist in her stomach. This was what she used to fight against. This was what her translations had helped expose. The casual corruption, the assumption that everything and everyone could be bought. And now she was serving wine to the men who embodied it, and she could do nothing but smile and nod and be invisible. Blackwell cut in, his English crisp and commanding, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. I don't like it. It's messy, and the current sanctions list is volatile. I won't risk exposure over paperwork that might change overnight. One executive order from Washington, and this entire structure collapses. We need redundancy. We need insulation. Then Nakamura, who had been silent, spoke in Japanese, his voice quiet but carrying weight, carrying the certainty of someone who had already solved the problem everyone else was still worried about. Sanctions are only a problem if the technology is classified as dual use. If we route the hardware through my subsidiary in Singapore, we can reclassify the shipment as civilian infrastructure. The paperwork will be clean. The regulatory burden shifts from military to commercial. No one will look twice. Catherine cleared the bread plates, her movements efficient and unremarkable, practiced and perfect. She didn't blink. She didn't pause. But inside, alarm bells were ringing like cathedral bells, loud and insistent and impossible to ignore, because she knew exactly what dual use meant. Technology that could be used for both civilian and military purposes. Satellite communications that could guide missiles as easily as they could connect phone calls. GPS systems that could navigate warships as easily as cargo vessels. And what Nakamura was proposing wasn't just creative accounting. It was illegal. It was a deliberate circumvention of international sanctions designed to prevent exactly this kind of weapons proliferation, designed to keep dangerous technology out of dangerous hands. She kept her face a perfect mask of professional blankness. She was a waitress. She was furniture. She was there to take orders, not to judge the contents of conversations she wasn't supposed to understand, wasn't supposed to care about, wasn't supposed to remember. Are you ready to order, gentlemen? She asked, her voice interrupting them at exactly the wrong moment, at precisely the point when Hoffman was about to object to something, when the conversation was about to turn contentious. Blackwell's annoyance flickered across his face like lightning, there and gone but unmistakable. He pointed at the menu with the kind of gesture that said he was doing her a favor by acknowledging her existence, by granting her the privilege of taking his order. The tomahawk steak rare, and tell the chef if it's even a degree over, I'm sending it back. "I'll know, I always know." The others gave their orders with varying degrees of courtesy. Volkov wanted borscht, joking that it would never be as good as his grandmother made, but he would try it anyway, as if his trying were a gift to the restaurant. Hoffman ordered Wiener Schnitzel with the air of a man inspecting foreign territory, looking for flaws, preparing to be disappointed. Nakamura requested the black cod, the only one who said please, the only one who made eye contact, though even his politeness felt calculated, felt like performance rather than genuine courtesy. Catherine recited the orders back flawlessly, translating Blackwell's threat into the polite language of fine dining, the language she had learned where everything was excellent and nothing was ever wrong until it was catastrophically wrong. "The tomahawk prepared rare, understood, sir. Excellent choices, gentlemen. I'll have those out shortly." For the next hour, she moved in and out of their orbit like a moon around a planet, refilling whiskey, clearing plates, bringing bread and butter, and all the small rituals of service that kept the machinery of wealth running smoothly, that made these men feel important, that reminded them they were powerful enough to have other humans serve them. And all the while, they talked. They were finalizing something they called Project Chimera, and the name itself made Catherine's translator mind light up with recognition and dread. Chimera, the monster from Greek mythology, made of mismatched parts, breathing fire, impossible and deadly, ultimately destroyed by the hero Bellerophon. It was a fitting name for what they were building, perhaps more fitting than they knew. The deal was worth billions, not millions. Billions with a B. Technology and infrastructure, satellite communications, and data networks, all threaded through shell corporations and offshore accounts, and the kind of legal structures designed to hide rather than reveal, designed to make tracing the money impossible, designed to ensure that when things went wrong, the people at this table would never be held accountable. They talked about timelines and profit margins and the delicate architecture of international law that they were preparing to violate, laughing about regulations the way some people laughed about speed limits, as inconveniences to be worked around rather than rules to be followed. They talked about risk assessment and plausible deniability, and the importance of keeping certain communications off official channels. Catherine absorbed it all, her mind cataloging details even as she smiled and nodded and brought more bread, even as she became increasingly aware that she was witnessing something criminal, something that could destroy lives and destabilize regions, and line the pockets of men who already had more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. And then Marcus Blackwell said the words that made Catherine's world tilt on its axis, that made the room spin, that made her forget for a dangerous moment that she was supposed to be invisible. "So we're agreed. David Sterling's team will handle the financial transfer as soon as the Shell Corporation is active. He's setting up the accounts in Cayman now. Should be operational by Friday." David Sterling. The name hit her like a fist to the chest, like the moment 5 years ago when the doctor had said your father is gone, like the moment 3 years ago when the tribunal had said you are terminated. The pitcher of ice water in her hand trembled, just for a fraction of a second, and she had to lock her knees to keep from staggering, had to force her breathing to stay normal, had to remind herself that she was invisible, that she couldn't react, that any sign of recognition would be dangerous. Her mind, which had been running translation algorithms and tracking conversation threads, suddenly went white with shock, with recognition, with the terrible clarity of understanding. David worked here, for this man, for Marcus Blackwell, not just worked here, but was trusted, was essential, was handling the financial architecture of a multi-billion-dollar criminal conspiracy. The realization cascaded through her like dominoes falling, like revelation, like the worst kind of enlightenment. This wasn't just any billionaire. This was David's boss, the man who had hired him, who had given him power, who had made him a vice president with a salary that probably had 6 figures before the decimal point, who had given him the resources and the platform to continue being exactly what he was, a man who destroyed people for profit and ambition. And if David worked here, if he was trusted with billion-dollar deals and international conspiracies, then the frame-up that had destroyed Catherine's life hadn't been just one ambitious man's jealousy, hadn't been just personal spite, hadn't been small and petty and individual. It had been backed by power, real power. The kind of power that could make tribunals go a certain way, that could ensure evidence pointed where it needed to point, that could ruin someone completely and never face consequences, that could buy silence and cooperation and the destruction of a woman's entire life. She excused herself, mumbling something about checking on their entrees, about confirming with the kitchen, about making sure everything was perfect, and retreated to the service station. Her heart was hammering so hard, she thought the other servers must be able to hear it, thought it must be visible, thought her chest must be moving with the force of it. She braced her hands on the polished wood and forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her mother had taught her when she had panic attacks after the tribunal. Sophia appeared beside her, concern written across her young face, worry in her eyes. "Kat, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. You're pale. Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine," Catherine lied, the words automatic, the denial reflexive. But she wasn't fine. She was standing on the edge of something vast, and she didn't know if it was opportunity or disaster, didn't know if fate was offering her a chance or preparing to destroy her all over again. The men at Table 7 were committing crimes, international crimes, sanctions violations that could land them in federal prison for decades, fraud on a scale that would make headlines, conspiracy that crossed borders and involved multiple governments. And she was the only person in the restaurant who understood what they were saying, who spoke all their languages fluently enough to catch every nuance, who could testify to exactly what was being planned, who could be a witness if anyone ever cared to ask. More than that, David Sterling's name was attached to this conspiracy, which meant he was vulnerable, which meant the man who had destroyed her life had just walked into a trap of his own making, which meant that maybe, just maybe, there was a kind of justice in the universe after all, a kind of balance, a kind of accounting. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and texted Sophia even though the younger woman was standing right beside her, even though they could have just talked, but somehow typing felt safer, felt less likely to be overheard. "Can't talk here. Meet me after shift. Important." Sophia read the message, looked at Catherine's face, looked at the fear and the hope and the desperation all mixed together, and nodded. "Be careful," she whispered. "Whatever this is, be careful. These men are dangerous." Catherine returned to Table 7 with a smile that felt like broken glass, with a mask that threatened to crack, with every muscle in her body tense with the effort of appearing normal. The men had moved past business into the casual cruelty that powerful people mistake for friendship, into the performative bonding that came from shared wealth and shared contempt for everyone who wasn't in their circle. Volkov was telling a story in rapid Russian, something about a competitor in Moscow, something that involved a yacht, and what sounded like either identical twins or a mistaken translation. Something that was making him laugh so hard, he was almost crying. The Russian word for twins and troubles was similar, and from the context, it could have been either. And Catherine's translator brain automatically tried to figure it out, even though it didn't matter, even though she should have been focused on something else. He gestured broadly, laughing at his own story, and Catherine noticed that Hoffman and Nakamura were lost, were looking confused and annoyed, were clearly not understanding what was being said. They didn't speak Russian. They were looking at Blackwell for translation, for interpretation, for someone to bridge the language gap. Blackwell, whose Russian was clearly conversational but not fluent, was struggling to keep up with Volkov's rapid speech and thick accent, and the idioms that didn't translate cleanly. His face showed frustration, the frustration of a man who prided himself on control and was encountering something he couldn't control. "Hold on, Roman," Blackwell said, holding up one hand in a gesture that was both command and plea. "You're going too fast. Slow down. Use simpler words." He pulled out his phone, sleek and expensive and custom-made, probably worth more than Catherine's monthly rent, probably worth what she made in 3 months of invisible service. "Let me try this new app. My tech division just acquired the startup. Supposedly translates in real time. AI-powered. Better than human, they claim." Better than human? The words hit Catherine like a slap. This was what had replaced her. This was what the world thought was sufficient. algorithms, code, machines that couldn't understand context or culture or the human heart. He activated the app and pointed the phone at Volkov like a weapon, like a solution, like proof that human expertise was obsolete. Volkov, delighted to have an audience again, delighted to be the center of attention, repeated the punchline of his story, enunciating carefully for the benefit of the technology. The phone's robotic voice spat out, "The bear entered the bicycle with the festive hats." Silence. Complete and total silence as the four men processed what they had just heard. Volkov looked confused, his story ruined. Hoffman looked bored, looked like he was calculating whether this dinner was worth his time. Nakamura's face remained neutral, but Catherine caught the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was trying not to laugh, that he found this whole display ridiculous. The app had completely missed the idiom, the cultural context, the entire point of the story. It had taken words and made nonsense, had proven that machines could not, in fact, replace human understanding, could not replicate the years of study and cultural immersion and intuitive grasp of meaning that made a translator valuable, had proven that algorithms were stupid and humans were not. Hoffman and Nakamura looked at each other, then at Blackwell, clearly wondering if this was a joke, if they were supposed to pretend this made sense, if the Emperor's new translation app was really invisible, or if they were allowed to acknowledge it was garbage. Blackwell's face darkened. He hated being embarrassed. More than that, he hated when his property failed him, when the things he bought didn't perform, when money couldn't solve a problem. And he clearly considered this app his property, his investment, his proof of technological superiority. He tossed the phone onto the table with a clatter that made the water glasses jump. "Useless," he muttered, disgust evident in his voice. "Is complex idiom, Damian," Volkov said, switching to heavily accented English, his jovial mood deflating. "It means he was made the fool, but he thought he was the clever one, you understand? Like puppet who thinks he pulls strings." Catherine was refilling water glasses, an invisible presence, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. The linguistic puzzle-solving part of her brain, the part that had spent years training to find the right word, the exact equivalent, the perfect translation, simply provided the answer before she could stop herself. The words came out quiet, but clear, professional and precise. A useful idiot, as it were. The conversation stopped completely. Stopped like someone had pressed pause on the universe. All four men turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since she had approached their table. It was like being caught in four separate spotlights, like being suddenly visible after years of invisibility, like being seen when you had forgotten what being seen felt like. Blackwell's eyes narrowed to slits, suspicion and surprise, and something else, maybe respect or maybe threat, flickering across his face. "What did you say?" There was no taking it back. The damage was done. She had spoken when she should have been silent. She had demonstrated competence when she was supposed to be furniture. She had made herself visible when invisibility was safety. Catherine straightened her spine, lifted her chin, met his gaze with the kind of calm she did not feel, with years of diplomatic training that said, even when you're terrified, even when you're exposed, you maintain composure. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just clarifying. The phrase Mr. Volkov used, padili, it's an old Russian expression, folk wisdom passed down through generations. It refers to someone being tricked into performing a role they don't understand, like a trained bear made to ride a bicycle for entertainment. They think they're performing. They don't realize they're being exploited. A useful idiot is the closest English equivalent we have for the concept." A heavy, dangerous silence descended on the table like fog, like the moment before violence, like the stillness before a storm. Volkov stared at her, his jaw slack, his jovial mask completely gone, replaced by calculation. Nakamura's eyebrows rose high on his forehead, surprise breaking through his careful neutrality. Hoffman looked offended, looked like her competence was a personal insult, like she had violated some natural law by being smart. And Blackwell looked like a man who had just realized that the furniture had opinions, that the decoration had thoughts, that he had been underestimating someone. "You speak Russian?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft, the kind of soft that was more dangerous than shouting. "Yes, sir," Catherine replied, her heart pounding but her voice steady. And English, obviously. There was a sneer in his voice now, mockery creeping in. The need to put her back in her place, to remind her that competence didn't matter if you were serving soup. What else? A little high school Spanish? The blood was rushing in her ears, the familiar heat of indignation rising in her chest. The old Catherine, who had been respected and valued, trying to break through the shell of the invisible woman she had become. But she held Ms. Chen's rules in her mind. Never engage, de-escalate, apologize, disappear, stay safe. But she couldn't quite make herself do it. Not anymore. Not after 3 years of biting her tongue. Not after 3 years of being nothing. I also speak German, sir, she said, nodding to Hoffman, letting him see that she had understood every word of his conspiracy. And Japanese. She nodded to Nakamura, letting him know his clever scheme had been heard and understood. And several others, French, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. I apologize for the interruption. I didn't mean to overstep. She tried to step back, to melt into the background again, to become invisible once more, to disappear into the safety of servitude. But Marcus Blackwell wasn't done with her. He had been upstaged by a waitress, and men like him did not tolerate that. Men like him needed to reassert dominance, needed to put people in their place, needed to remind everyone in the room who had power and who didn't. He let out a short, barking laugh. It was a horrible sound, dismissive and cruel, designed to humiliate, designed to destroy, designed to remind her that intelligence meant nothing if you didn't have power to protect it. The sound echoed across the restaurant like a gunshot. "Several others?" he said, his voice rising, performative now, putting on a show. "How many is several, sweetheart?" The sweetheart landed like a slap, like it always did. That particular word that men used when they wanted to remind women that competence didn't matter, that intelligence didn't matter, that everything could be diminished with a single condescending endearment, with a single word that said, "You are female, and therefore lesser." Catherine felt something crack inside her, felt 3 years of careful control threatening to break, felt the ghost she had become remember what it was like to be alive, to be real, to matter. 10, sir, I'm fluent in 10 languages. Marcus Blackwell threw his head back and laughed. It was a full-throated, booming sound that echoed across the restaurant like thunder, like mockery made audible, like cruelty given voice. Diners at other tables turned to look, their conversations pausing, their attention captured by the spectacle of a billionaire laughing at his waitress. Ms. Chen, across the room by the hostess stand, looked like she might actually faint or scream or fire Catherine on the spot. 10 languages, Blackwell announced to the table, to the room, to anyone within earshot, making sure everyone knew, making sure Catherine's humiliation was public and complete. He wiped an imaginary tear from his eye, performing amusement like an actor on a stage. "This woman, this waitress, claims she speaks 10 languages, and she's serving me soup. What a tragedy, what a waste." His companions laughed on cue, nervous and uncertain, but following their leader because that's what men like them did, because challenging Blackwell would be social suicide. Hoffman's laugh was thin and mechanical. Nakamura barely smiled, just a polite upturning of lips that didn't reach his eyes. But Volkov's laugh was genuine, was cruel, and his eyes, when they looked at Catherine, held a different kind of assessment now, something predatory, something that made her skin crawl. "That's quite a party trick," Blackwell continued, his voice dripping with condescension, with a particular cruelty that came easy to men who had never been vulnerable. "Tell me, sweetheart, if you're so brilliant, why are you here? Why aren't you running the United Nations? Or at the very least designing a translation app that actually works? Surely someone as talented as you deserves better than serving me soup." He smirked, tapped the useless phone on the table, and Catherine understood what he was really saying. He was saying that if she were actually talented, she wouldn't be here. He was saying that her presence here proved she was lying, proved she was nothing, proved that 10 languages meant nothing if you ended up serving soup. It was the moment of complete humiliation. He had taken her entire life, her mind, her education, her decade of study and work and passion and expertise, and reduced it to a failed party trick. He had dismissed her as worthless. He had made her nothing in front of everyone, had performed her destruction as entertainment. And something inside Catherine Morrison, something that had been sleeping for 3 years, something that had been beaten down and buried and nearly destroyed, woke up. She did not apologize. She did not back down. She did not retreat into the safety of invisibility. Instead, she stood very still, and the mask of professional deference that she had worn for 3 years fell away like a curtain dropping. Her expression sharpened into something focused, analytical, cold. The expression of a woman who had translated for ambassadors and negotiated for peace, and once been considered one of the most brilliant minds in her field. The expression of someone who was done being invisible, done being nothing, done letting men like this destroy her. She looked Marcus Blackwell directly in the eye, this man who had unknowingly hired the person who destroyed her, this man who was at this very table committing international crimes, this man who thought she was nothing. He was still smiling, waiting for her to crumble, waiting for tears or stammering or the retreat of the defeated, waiting for her to know her place. "You're right, Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice clear and carrying without being loud, every word chosen with precision, every syllable a weapon. "It is a useful skill." Blackwell's smile faltered. He had expected tears. He had expected an apology. He had expected her to know her place and accept his judgment. He had not expected this sudden, unnerving calm. He had not expected steel. He had not expected the furniture to fight back. "A skill," Catherine continued, her gaze unwavering, holding his eyes with an intensity that made him shift in his seat, "that allows one to understand complex discussions, even when they are intentionally fragmented across multiple languages, even when people assume no one listening could possibly understand. Even when powerful men think they're safe because they're speaking German or Russian or Japanese." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Blackwell snapped, his patience gone, his amusement curdling into something darker. Catherine took a half step closer to the table, entering their sacred circle of power, violating the invisible boundary between servant and served. She looked past Blackwell, directly at Klaus Hoffmann, and when she spoke, her accent shifted to flawless, crisp High German, the German of diplomats and academics, not the German of tourists. "For example, Herr Hoffmann, I understood your concern about Project Chimera relying on the Baltic access point. You're worried that the permits are not a formality at all, that Mr. Volkov is underestimating the new EU regulatory protocols. You believe his connections may be compromised, that he's promising something he can't deliver. You think this whole deal might be built on wishful thinking and corruption." Hoffman's face went white, actually white, the color draining from his skin like someone had pulled a plug, like all his blood had decided to be somewhere else. He physically recoiled as if she had struck him, as if her words were violence. Before Blackwell could react, before anyone could speak or move or process what had just happened, Catherine turned her gaze to Kenji Nakamura. Her voice softened, her cadence changing as she switched to perfectly polite, formal Japanese, the Japanese of business negotiations and diplomatic functions. "And I understood your very clever solution, Nakamura-san. Reroute the dual-use hardware through the Singapore subsidiary to reclassify it as civilian infrastructure, a direct violation of the Wassenaar Arrangement on export controls for conventional arms and dual-use goods and technologies. A very bold and very illegal maneuver to bypass international sanctions. Elegant but criminal." Nakamura's sharp intake of breath was the only sound he made. He froze, his hand halfway to his coffee cup, his careful composure cracking for the first time, surprise and fear flickering across his face before he could control it. Then Catherine turned to Roman Volkov, and her Russian was fluid, infused with just the right touch of Moscow familiarity, the Russian of someone who had spent time in the country, who had learned not just the language, but the culture. "And you, Mr. Volkov, you assured them the gifts were handled, that the ministers would cooperate, that the port was yours. But you also mentioned to Herr Hoffmann, when Mr. Blackwell was on the phone taking that call from New York, that you were feeding the bears just enough to keep them sleepy. You weren't referring to the ministers, were you? You were talking about your partners, about these men at this table. You're planning to betray them all." Volkov's jovial mask dissolved like sugar in water. He looked at Blackwell, then at Hoffman, his eyes wide with something between panic and rage, the look of a man whose secrets had just been exposed, whose plans had just been ruined. Finally, Catherine's gaze landed like a physical weight on Marcus Blackwell. He was no longer laughing. He looked like he had been carved from ice, his face ashen, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on the table. He was, for the first time in his adult life, completely and utterly speechless. "And you, Mr. Blackwell," Catherine said, switching back to cold, clear English, "you tied it all together. You were concerned about the sanctions, worried about exposure, but not concerned enough to walk away. And you approved the financial transfer to be handled by David Sterling's team." She let the name hang in the air between them, venomous and glittering, a name that meant something to her that none of these men could understand, a name that connected her past to her present in ways they would never know. The silence in the restaurant was total, complete, the kind of silence that feels like held breath. The other diners had given up pretending they weren't watching. They were all staring now, witnessing this impossible thing, this waitress dismantling billionaires with nothing but words. Ms. Chen stood frozen by the hostess stand, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. "I believe, sir," Catherine said, the slightest, most dangerous hint of a smile touching her lips, "that you have what you would call exposure. Your entire multi-billion-dollar Project Chimera is not only in violation of international law, but it's built on a foundation of partners who are already planning to betray each other. And I am the only person in this room who knows the full picture, who understood all the pieces, who can testify to exactly what was said in exactly what language, who can connect all the dots that you thought were safely separated by the barriers of language." She paused, letting the magnitude of her words settle over them like fallout, like radiation, like the slow realization that their entire world had just changed. "Now," she said, her voice returning to a neutral professional tone, the tone of someone taking an order, "would any of you gentlemen care for dessert? The creme brulee is excellent this evening." Marcus Blackwell didn't speak. He couldn't. The calculations were running behind his eyes, the threat assessment, the damage control, the realization that he had been assessed and analyzed and summarily dismantled by the waitress. He had laughed at her, and she had responded by holding a metaphorical stick of dynamite to his entire empire, by proving that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't always the one with the most money. Slowly, like a man moving through water, he raised one hand and pointed a single trembling finger at her. "You," he whispered, his voice raw, stripped of its usual authority. "In my office, tomorrow, 7 a.m. "I'm sorry, sir," Catherine replied, picking up the empty water pitcher with steady hands, with the calm of someone who had just burned her bridges and didn't care. "I'm scheduled for a double shift tomorrow. I'm afraid I'm not available." For a second, Blackwell looked like he might actually explode. His face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists, veins standing out on his neck. But then something shifted. A strange, terrifying new expression crossed his face. It was not anger. It was not humiliation. It was respect. The grudging, uncomfortable respect of a predator recognizing another predator, of power recognizing power. "Cancel it," he ordered, his voice dropping back to something like normal. He pulled a black metal business card from his jacket pocket and slapped it onto the table between the water glasses and the whiskey bottle. 7 a.m. Don't be late." He threw his napkin onto his half-eaten steak, the gesture final, the dinner over. "Gentlemen, I believe this dinner is over. We have things to discuss, in private, away from ears that apparently understand more languages than we thought possible." Without another word, he and his 3 shell-shocked associates stood and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a table full of expensive food and a silence so profound it rang in Catherine's ears like a bell, like a note held too long, like the sound of her old life ending and her new life beginning. She stood by the table for a long moment, her heart racing, adrenaline singing through her veins, her hands starting to shake now that the moment had passed, now that the performance was over. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had exposed them. She had made herself visible. She had spoken when she should have been silent. And she had no idea what would happen next. Across the room, Ms. Chen was walking toward her, her face unreadable, her steps measured and deliberate. When she reached Catherine, when they stood face to face for what Catherine was certain would be her firing. Ms. Chen said only one thing. "You're fired, Morrison. Clean out your locker." Catherine nodded. She had expected this. She had known that the moment she spoke, the moment she made herself visible, there would be consequences. "Yes, ma'am." But Ms. Chen wasn't finished. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Catherine could hear, her expression softening for just a moment. "And you were magnificent. The most magnificent thing I've seen in 15 years of watching people grovel. You didn't grovel. You roared." She slipped a business card into Catherine's hand, her own personal number written on the back in elegant script. "Call me tomorrow, we should talk." Then she walked away, leaving Catherine holding the card and trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand if she had destroyed her life again, or if she had somehow impossibly saved it. Sophia rushed over, nearly knocking over a tray in her haste, her professional composure completely abandoned. "Cat! Oh my God, are you okay? That was, I don't even have words for what that was." She pulled Catherine into a hug right there in the middle of the dining room, breaking every rule of professional conduct, not caring who saw or what anyone thought. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," Sophia whispered against Catherine's shoulder. "Or the stupidest. I haven't decided which, maybe both. Definitely both." Catherine laughed, and it came out shaky and a little wild, the laugh of someone who had just jumped off a cliff and didn't know yet if there was water below or rocks. "Me neither." Tommy the bartender appeared with a glass of whiskey, the good stuff from the top shelf. "On me," he said simply. "You're my hero. You're everyone's hero. You just did what we all dream of doing. You told the truth to power. You made them see you." Catherine took it, downed it in one burning swallow that brought tears to her eyes, and felt the world tilt slightly. She had just blown up her life. Again. But this time it felt different. This time she had been the one holding the match. The alley behind the Meridian was dark and damp, smelling of sour wine and rain, and all the things that accumulated in the shadows of expensive places. It was 1:30 in the morning when Catherine finally walked out with her few belongings in a tote bag. Her uniform returned to the locker room for the last time, her name already erased from the schedule board. She had changed into jeans and a sweater, had said goodbye to Sophia, who promised to call tomorrow, had accepted another hug from Tommy, who told her she was going to be just fine, better than fine. Ms. Chen had simply nodded when Catherine returned her key, said nothing more than, "Tomorrow," and walked away. Catherine walked into the alley, her mind still racing, her body still vibrating with adrenaline and shock and something that might have been hope or might have been terror. She pulled out her phone, knew she needed to call her mother, needed to hear Grace's voice telling her it would be okay, even if it wouldn't be, even if she had just destroyed herself all over again. But before she could dial, she saw it, a long black sedan parked at the mouth of the alley, engine purring like a predator, like something alive and dangerous. As she approached, the rear door opened. "Get in." It was not a request. It was inevitability. It was fate arriving in the form of German engineering and tinted windows. Catherine sighed, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, thought about running, thought about refusing, thought about all the sensible things she should do. And then she slid onto the plush leather seat because sometimes you had to walk into the lion's den to see if you were the lion or the prey. The interior was silent, insulated from the city, warm and dark and smelling of expensive cologne and leather, and power concentrated into a small space. Marcus Blackwell sat opposite her, illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard, shadows playing across his face. He looked tired, but his eyes were ferociously bright, were alive with something Catherine couldn't quite name. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, merging into the river of lights that was Manhattan at night. "Who are you?" he asked, and it was not the same question as before. The sneer was gone. This was genuine curiosity, genuine interest, the question of a man who had just discovered that the world was more complicated than he thought. "I told you, Catherine Morrison." "Dr. Catherine Morrison," he corrected, and his voice held something new, something like respect. "Formerly of the United States State Department, linguistics prodigy, top-level security clearance, simultaneous interpreter for the United Nations, doctorate from Georgetown, accused of leaking the Kovalchuk diplomatic memo 3 years ago, disgraced, disavowed, blacklisted. And now I understand why you speak 10 languages, why you're brilliant, why you're wasted serving soup. He had been busy in the last few hours, had run a thorough background check while she was finishing her shift, had learned everything about her that could be learned from files and records and the digital trail everyone left behind. "You don't like surprises, Mr. Blackwell," Catherine observed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I don't. And you, Dr. Morrison, are the biggest surprise I've had in a very long time. My security team is currently having a collective panic attack about the fact that you got within 3 feet of me, about the fact that you served me dinner and could have poisoned me, about the fact that someone with your background and skills has been invisible to us for 3 years. I was serving you scallops, Mr. Blackwell, not trying to assassinate you. You did worse, much worse." His voice was quiet but intense. "You blew up a billion-dollar deal. You exposed criminal conspiracy. You implicated my associates in sanctions violations. You demonstrated that you understood every word we said in 3 different languages. You made us all vulnerable, all because I laughed at you, all because I called you sweetheart and dismissed you as nothing." Catherine turned to look at him, the city lights sliding over her face through the tinted windows. Manhattan at night reduced to streaks of gold and white. "No, I did it because you said the name David Sterling." Blackwell leaned forward, and now she had his complete attention, all of it focused on her like a spotlight. "This is the part I'm interested in. This is what I need to understand. You know Sterling?" And Catherine, who had kept this story locked inside her for 3 years, who had told no one except her mother and Sophia the full truth, found the words spilling out, found herself telling him everything. "I know him," she said, and her voice was steady but her hands were shaking. "He was my colleague, my friend. Or I thought he was. We were the top 2 translators in the department. He was ambitious and charming and good at his job. But I was better. And he couldn't handle that. When the Kovalchuk memo came across my desk, I translated it like I had translated hundreds of others. Standard procedure, perfect protocol, and then it leaked." "It leaked," Blackwell echoed, watching her face. "And the digital signature on the leak pointed to my workstation. The password used was my mother's maiden name. It was a perfect frame, a perfect trap. I was dragged into a tribunal. I had no defense, no proof, nothing but my word against the evidence. My life was over in 48 hours. My security clearance revoked. My position terminated. My reputation destroyed, my name blacklisted, everything I had worked for gone. And Sterling? He was the one who discovered the breach, who compiled the evidence, who testified against me with tears in his eyes. And 2 weeks later, he was promoted into my vacant position. My position. The one I had earned. 6 months after that, he left for the private sector. For you. For Blackwell Industries. For the kind of money and power that should have been impossible if he had any conscience. The car was silent except for the whisper of tires on asphalt, the distant sounds of the city muted by luxury and insulation. Blackwell processed this information with the speed of a man who had built an empire on reading people and situations. "He's good," Blackwell admitted, almost to himself. "Ruthless, efficient, smart. He brought me the Chimera deal. Put the partners together, Hoffman, Nakamura, Volkov. Structured the whole thing. It was his brainchild." "And he put you all in a room where a waitress could hear you," Catherine said. "Where I could hear you. Where you could hear me," Blackwell corrected, his eyes sharp. "A 1 in a million chance. A coincidence. He couldn't have known you worked there. Couldn't have known you would be assigned to my table. Couldn't have planned for you to be there." "Couldn't he?" Catherine asked, and the question hung in the air between them like smoke, like possibility, like the worst kind of paranoia that might actually be truth. Or maybe he did know. Maybe he's known where I was this whole time. Maybe he enjoys it. The woman whose career he destroyed living on minimum wage, polishing silver, serving soup to people like you. Maybe he wanted me to hear it. Maybe seeing me broken was part of his pleasure. She paused, let that sink in. Or maybe it's worse than that. Maybe this whole thing is another frame up. Maybe he's planning to expose Project Chimera himself, to destroy you the way he destroyed me, to take your company the way he took my career. Blackwell stared out the window, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. looked like a man who had just realized he might be the one being played. Why? Why would he risk his own position? Why would he risk the deal? Because maybe the deal isn't his endgame. You are. If Chimera fails, he's not the one who goes to prison. You are. Your partners are. He's positioned himself carefully, documented everything, created paper trails that point away from him and toward you. And when it all collapses, when the investigations start, when the arrests happen, he walks away clean. Maybe even as a whistleblower, maybe even as a hero who exposed corruption. And then he takes your company for pennies when your stock crashes. He frames you the way he framed me. Same playbook, same pattern. He destroys the person above him and takes everything they had. Marcus Blackwell, the man who prided himself on being 10 steps ahead of everyone, who had built an empire on anticipating moves and countermoves, stared out the window at the city he thought he owned. And Catherine watched him realize that he might have welcomed a viper into his house, that the man he trusted might be planning his destruction, that he might be walking into a trap the same way she had walked into one 3 years ago. "The man who destroyed me works for you," Catherine said softly. "And right now, at this very moment, he's probably planning your destruction. You humiliated me tonight, Mr. Blackwell. You laughed at me. You called me sweetheart. You dismissed me as nothing. But David Sterling has been laughing at you for months, and you never even heard it." Blackwell's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping. The tick was back. He had been played. He, Marcus Blackwell, master of the universe, had been outmaneuvered by his own employee. "The meeting," he said finally, his voice low and controlled but with an edge of steel. 7 a.m. It's not a request anymore. It's a job offer, a proposition, an alliance. I'm not a corporate spy, Mr. Blackwell. No! You're something better. You're a witness. You're a weapon. Sterling is smart, brilliantly smart, but he's arrogant. He thinks no one can touch him. He's been communicating with the partners, with someone, and I guarantee you he thinks no one can understand what he's saying. He doesn't know about you. Doesn't know that I now have someone who speaks every language he uses, who can track every conversation, who can be my eyes and ears in places he thinks are safe. You're my ghost, my secret weapon. He tapped a button and a privacy screen slid up, separating them from the driver, creating complete privacy. "You help me fix this," Blackwell said, and his voice was pure business now, pure negotiation. "You help me expose Sterling before he can destroy my company, before he can frame me the way he framed you, before he can turn me into you, disgraced and destroyed and blacklisted. And I will do more than clear your name. I will give you the resources to tear David Sterling's life down to the foundation. I will personally hand you the match and the gasoline. I will make sure he loses everything the way you lost everything. I will give you revenge." Catherine looked at the man who, just hours before, had mocked her existence, had laughed at her languages, had called her sweetheart, and dismissed her as furniture. It was a deal with the devil. But this devil was offering her the one thing she craved more than air, more than justice, more than peace. Revenge, pure, perfect, complete revenge. "I'll need access to your servers," Catherine said, her voice steady, her mind already calculating. "All of them, every system, every communication channel, and a direct line to your internal security, and a written contract that guarantees my exoneration when this is done. I want it in writing, I want a lawyer, I want protection." Blackwell smiled, and it was cold and sharp and predatory, the smile of a shark that had just found an ally who was also a shark. "Welcome to the team, Dr. Morrison." The car pulled up to a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. Catherine looked out and saw lights on in the windows. Her mother's house. Blackwell had known where she would need to go, had anticipated her need for family, for grounding. 48 hours, he said as she reached for the door handle. "I'll send a car at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Be ready." And Dr. Morrison, thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to speak. Thank you for reminding me that the most dangerous person in the room isn't always the one with the most money. Sometimes it's the one everyone underestimates. The car window slid down as she stepped onto the sidewalk. "Dr. Morrison," Blackwell said, his voice carrying that edge of respect again. "You just dismantled 3 billionaires and a private equity titan with nothing but your mind and your voice. You just proved that languages are power, that understanding is power, that being underestimated is power. Don't doubt yourself now. Don't doubt what you're capable of." The window slid up, the car disappeared into the night. Catherine stood on the sidewalk, looking up at her mother's house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the place where she had always been loved regardless of success or failure. She climbed the steps and used her key, the one Grace had given her years ago, with the instruction to always come home. Grace was waiting in the kitchen, making tea even though it was nearly 2 in the morning, because mothers knew, they always knew when their children needed them. "Baby," Grace said, opening her arms. Catherine walked into them and let herself be held, let herself feel the full weight of what she had just done, what she had just risked, what she had just possibly won or lost. "Something happened," Grace said. Not a question, a statement, a mother's certainty. "Everything happened to me, everything." And Catherine told her, all of it, the table, the conspiracy, the confrontation, the firing, the car, the offer. Grace listened the way she always did, with her whole attention, with her whole heart, asking questions that got to the heart of things. "Are you doing this for justice or revenge?" Grace asked finally, her voice gentle but probing. "Does it matter?" "Yes, baby, it matters. Justice heals. Revenge poisons. Justice is about making things right. Revenge is about making things even. They're not the same thing." Catherine pulled back, looked at her mother's face. This woman who had survived her own losses and betrayals, who had buried her husband and rebuilt her life, and chosen grace over bitterness every single day. "I'm so angry, me. For 3 years I've been nothing, invisible, dismissed. I've served soup to people who treated me like furniture. And tonight I found out that the man who destroyed me is part of a criminal conspiracy, that his boss is a billionaire who laughed at my languages. I'm so angry I can barely breathe. And I want them to hurt. I want David to lose everything. I want him to know what it feels like." Grace studied her daughter's face for a long moment, reading the pain and the rage and the desperate need for vindication. Then she cupped Catherine's face in her hands, the way she had when Catherine was small. "Then do it," Grace said, surprising her. "Do it. Expose him. Fight back. Get your justice. But remember, baby, remember who you are while you're doing it. Remember that you're my daughter, that you're your father's daughter, that you're someone who believes words can heal. Don't become him in the process of fighting him. Don't let revenge make you into the thing you hate. Your father used to say that the best revenge is becoming so happy, so successful, so at peace, that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. Maybe that's what you should aim for. Not his destruction, but your irrelevance to his existence." Catherine hugged her mother tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her, the lavender and the hand cream and the comfort of being known completely. "I don't know if I can do that, me. I don't know if I can be that good." "You don't have to be good," Grace said. "You just have to be yourself. The rest will follow." Catherine went upstairs to her old bedroom, to the twin bed and the quilt and the posters still on the walls. She lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing too fast for sleep, thinking about tomorrow, about Blackwell, about David, about the choice between justice and revenge, and whether there was really any difference at all. In 48 hours, she would either destroy David Sterling or he would destroy her. There was no middle ground, no safe path, just the narrow edge between justice and vengeance, and she would have to walk it without falling. Somewhere in the city, David Sterling was sleeping, unaware that the woman he had destroyed was about to rise from the ashes, unaware that he had made one fatal mistake. He had assumed she would stay broken. He had assumed she would stay silent. He had assumed she would stay invisible. He had been wrong about all of it. And tomorrow, Catherine Morrison would teach him the cost of underestimating a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. A woman who spoke 10 languages and understood that the most powerful language of all was the language of consequences, of accountability, of justice, finally arriving. The black car arrived at exactly 6:30, silent and precise as a surgeon's knife cutting through the early morning darkness. Catherine stood on the sidewalk outside her mother's brownstone, dressed in the same clothes she had worn to serve tables, her hair pulled back in the same practical knot. She had slept maybe 2 hours, her mind too busy running scenarios and possibilities and the endless translation of fear into action, of doubt into determination. Grace appeared in the doorway, bathrobe wrapped tight against the October morning chill, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. She looked smaller somehow in the half-light, older than her 66 years, and Catherine felt a pang of guilt for the worry she was putting her mother through, for the risk she was taking, for the danger she was walking into. They didn't say be careful or come home safe or any of the things mothers usually said when their children walked into the unknown. Grace simply looked at her daughter with eyes that had seen Catherine through skinned knees and broken hearts and a destroyed career, eyes that held love and fear and pride all mixed together, and said, "Remember who you are. Not remember to be careful. Not remember that revenge is dangerous, just remember who you are. Remember the girl who learned languages because she loved them. Remember the woman who believed words could heal. Remember that brilliance was a gift, not a weapon, unless you needed it to be." Catherine nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat, around the fear and hope and desperate need all tangled together. She walked down the steps and got into the car, into the plush leather silence, into the unknown. The drive to Blackwell Industries was quiet. The driver didn't speak. The city was still waking up, streetlights flickering off as dawn crept over the buildings, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. Catherine watched Manhattan transform from night to day, and thought about the last time she had felt this kind of anticipation, this kind of focused intensity. It had been before the tribunal, before her world had ended, when she had still believed that competence mattered, that truth would prevail, that justice was real. She knew better now. Justice was not real. Justice was something you had to build with your own hands, with your own voice, with your own refusal to stay broken. Blackwell Industries occupied a sphere of glass and steel in downtown Manhattan, the kind of building that seemed to pierce the sky with pure ambition, with the distilled essence of capitalism and power. The lobby was all polished marble, and the hushed reverence that money commanded, that wealth demanded. Catherine walked through the front entrance at 6:58, still in her server's pants and comfortable shoes, a stark contrast to the parade of designer suits flowing around her like a river around a stone, like she was an obstacle, an anomaly, something that didn't belong. The security guard at the front desk had her name on a list. He handed her a black unmarked access card without comment, though his eyes lingered on her outfit with poorly concealed curiosity, with the kind of assessment that said she clearly wasn't supposed to be here, that something was wrong with this picture. "Top floor, ma'am. Mr. Blackwell is expecting you." The elevator was empty, mirrored on all sides, and Catherine caught multiple reflections of herself, fractured and multiplied. She looked tired. She looked underdressed. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had been fired from a restaurant 12 hours ago and was now walking into a billionaire's office armed with nothing but her mind and a desperate need for justice, for vindication, for proof that the last 3 years hadn't been for nothing. The doors opened directly into Blackwell's penthouse office. It was vast and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive emptiness, with a 180-degree view of the city still dark and glittering below like promises, like threats, like the whole world spread out for those who had the power to take it. Marcus Blackwell stood by the windows, silhouetted against the dawn, a cup of coffee in his hand. He hadn't slept either. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he held himself, in the tension that radiated from him like heat. "Dr. Morrison, good, you're punctual." He turned, and the first light of morning caught his face, showing the lines around his eyes, the exhaustion he was trying to hide, the realization that someone he trusted might be planning his destruction. "Coffee, please." He poured from a French press that probably cost more than her monthly rent had been, handed her a cup in china so fine she could see her fingers through it. The coffee was excellent, rich and complex, the kind of thing she hadn't tasted in 3 years of instant crystals and break-room drip. "Thank you for coming," he said. And there was no mockery now, no condescension, just the simple acknowledgement of one professional to another, of two people who needed each other. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about Sterling potentially setting me up the way he set you up, about Project Chimera being a trap instead of an opportunity. And I want to believe you're wrong. I want to believe I'm better at reading people than that I would have seen the signs, that I couldn't possibly be that blind. He paused, stared into his coffee. But I called my head of security at 3 this morning, had him start running deep background on Sterling. Financial records, communication logs, everything we could access legally and some things we maybe couldn't. And there are anomalies, gaps, encrypted communications we can't trace, money moving in patterns that don't quite make sense. Catherine felt something cold settle in her stomach. Vindication mixed with dread. She had been right. David was planning something. Oh, what kind of patterns? Shell corporations, offshore accounts, the same kind of structures he built for Chimera, but separate, hidden, pointing away from the main deal. Blackwell gestured to a glass-walled conference room that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film. I need you to help me understand what he's doing. I need your mind, your languages, your ability to see patterns that other people miss. Inside the conference room, a powerful workstation sat on a desk of polished chrome, multiple monitors arranged in an arc like wings, a keyboard that probably cost more than her weekly salary at the Meridian. The setup was elegant, efficient, expensive in the way that said money was no object when it came to having the best tools. "That's your new office," Blackwell said, watching her take it in. "My tech team has set up a terminal with complete access to our internal servers. Every email David Sterling has sent, every instant message, every file he's touched, server logs, encrypted communications, everything. It's a ghost access port, meaning he won't know you're looking. To his system, you don't exist, you're invisible. Catherine felt the irony like a physical weight. 3 years of being invisible as a waitress, and now she was being asked to be invisible again. But this time as a weapon, as a spy, as the thing that would destroy the man who had destroyed her. "You have 48 hours, Blackwell continued, his voice hard, businesslike. "At noon on Friday, I have a final video conference with Hoffman, Nakamura, and Volkov to sign the wire transfer agreements. $500 million each. $1.5 billion total, moving through the system Sterling designed. I need your proof before then. I need to know if this deal is real or if it's a trap. If I don't have it, I have to kill the deal and eat $100 million loss in setup costs, in legal fees, in partnerships I've been building for 6 months. And if I'm wrong about Sterling, if he's not betraying me, I've just destroyed my best deal maker over paranoia." He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the air anyway, unspoken but clear. If she failed, if she was wrong, if this was all just her own paranoia projected onto him, she was done. Worse than done. She would be the crazy woman who sabotaged a billion-dollar deal because she had a grudge against an employee, who let her personal vendetta destroy something bigger than herself. Catherine walked into the conference room and sat down at the workstation. The chair was leather and ergonomic and probably cost more than her car, than any car she had ever owned. The monitors flickered to life at her touch, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something she had almost forgotten. The rush of the hunt, the pure, clean focus of a problem that needed solving. The sense that her mind mattered, that her skills had value, that she could be useful again, could be powerful again, could be something other than invisible. She started with Sterling's emails, the ones marked official, the ones that would pass any surface inspection. They were immaculate. Every communication about Project Chimera was official, documented, covered in so many layers of corporate language that they read like legal documents, like testimony prepared for a trial. He was covering his tracks with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, who had done this before, who had learned from experience that the key to a successful frame-up was making sure the evidence was perfect, was making sure no one would look twice. "He's not stupid," Catherine said into the intercom that connected her to Blackwell's main office, her voice carrying through the empty space. "He's not using corporate email for anything that matters. Everything here is clean, too clean. This is what he wants you to see." "Then I'll find what he doesn't want me to see." Catherine dug deeper, into server logs and data packets and the digital architecture that most people never saw, the infrastructure beneath the infrastructure. She found it within the hour, a steady stream of encrypted data pinging from Sterling's workstation to a private server in the Cayman Islands. It was elegant, it was professional, It was completely impenetrable without the encryption key. "It's encrypted," she reported back. "Military grade, AES 256-bit encryption. I can see that he's communicating with someone, but I can't see what he's saying. The data is gibberish without the key." "Then find the key," Blackwell's voice came back, impatient, sharp with the frustration of a man who was used to problems being solved immediately, who was used to money-making obstacles disappear. Catherine leaned back in the expensive chair and closed her eyes, thinking, remembering, trying to get into David's head. How would David think? How would he protect his secrets? He was arrogant. He loved to show off. He had always loved linguistic puzzles almost as much as she did, had loved demonstrating his intelligence, his education, his superiority. He wouldn't use a random string of characters for his passwords. That would be pedestrian, boring beneath him. He would use something clever, something that demonstrated how smart he was, something that only another linguist would appreciate. She went back through his corporate messages. Not the official emails, but the internal chat logs with his team. Thousands of lines of mundane communication about meetings and deadlines and the boring machinery of business. And there, buried in a discussion about file security from 2 months ago, she found it. "File is locked. Key is the Aramaic word for thunder. Use the classical spelling, not the modern." Another message weeks later, in a different context. "Send that to legal. Password is the god of boundaries in Roman mythology, the one with 2 faces." Catherine felt a smile pull at her lips, felt the familiar thrill of solving a puzzle, of seeing the pattern that others missed. Janus, the god of boundaries, of doorways, of transitions, of beginnings and endings. Of course David would use that. He saw himself as a man between worlds, moving through boundaries that constrained lesser people, existing in liminal spaces where he could be whoever he needed to be. He was using linguistic trivia as passwords, showing off his education even when no one was watching, demonstrating his cleverness to himself because he couldn't help it, because his ego demanded recognition even from the empty air. It was so perfectly David that she almost laughed, that she felt a flash of the old affection she had once had for him, before it had all gone wrong, before he had destroyed her, before she had learned what he really was beneath the charm. Now she had the pattern, but she needed to find the right password for the right file, needed to match the encryption to the lock. She cross-referenced the timestamps on the encrypted data transfers with Sterling's calendar, looking for patterns, looking for correlations. A pattern emerged. Every time he had a call with only Nakamura, there was a data transfer. Every time he spoke with only Hoffman, another transfer. Every time Volkov was mentioned, encrypted data flowed to the Cayman server. He was communicating with each partner individually, playing them against each other, keeping everyone isolated, feeding each one different information. Catherine focused on the Nakamura files first, on the data transfers that corresponded with Japanese communications. David's Japanese was excellent, academic, precise, but his cultural knowledge was theoretical rather than lived. She remembered his thesis from graduate school, the paper he had been so proud of, the work that had gotten him into Yale's PhD program before he had dropped out for the State Department job. Heian period poetry. He had been obsessed with it, with the court literature of ancient Japan, with the refined aesthetic of a culture that had existed 1,000 years ago. She tried several options, working through David's academic history like a detective following clues. Murasaki, the author of The Tale of Genji, access denied. Kyoto, the ancient capital where the Heian court had flourished, access denied. Genji itself, the prince of the tale, access denied. Then she remembered. Renga, the linked verse poetry that had been David's particular obsession, his dissertation topic before he had abandoned academia. The collaborative form where poets built on each other's work in an endless chain of meaning, each verse responding to and transforming the one before it. It was about connection and transformation, and the way meaning could shift when context changed. Of course that would be his password. She typed it in with hands that were suddenly shaking. Access granted. The file opened like a door swinging wide, and Catherine began to read. Her blood, which had been singing with the thrill of the puzzle, ran cold, ran ice cold, ran to a temperature she didn't know blood could reach while still flowing. David Sterling was betraying them all, every single one of them. Not just Blackwell, not just the partners, everyone. The messages to Nakamura were in a mix of modern Japanese and old Heian court language, dense with classical references and business terminology, designed to be untranslatable by any machine and unreadable by anyone without deep expertise in both linguistics and finance. But Catherine could read it as easily as a children's book, as easily as breathing, as easily as her own name. David was convincing Nakamura that Blackwell and the Germans were planning to cut him out after the deal was signed. He was offering a separate arrangement, a private deal, a way to sabotage Project Chimera at the critical moment, and then profit from the chaos. Help crash Blackwell's stock through leaked information about the sanctions violations, then buy the company for pennies when the price collapsed. Nakamura would become co-CEO of the new entity. David would become the primary controller, the power behind the throne. It was elegant, it was ruthless, and it was exactly what Catherine had suspected. Exactly what she had warned Blackwell about in the car last night. "I have it," she said into the intercom, her voice shaking with rage and triumph, and the terrible satisfaction of being right. The Nakamura correspondence. "He's planning a hostile takeover using the sanctions violation as leverage. He's going to crash your stock and buy the company out from under you. He's not just stealing the deal, he's stealing everything." "Good." Blackwell's voice held dark satisfaction. "Now get me the others. Get me all of them. I want every betrayal, every lie, every piece of his plan laid out where I can see it." It was easier now that she knew the pattern, now that she understood how David's mind worked. For Hoffman's files, she tried passwords related to German literature and mythology, working through the canon that David would have studied, that he would have drawn from. The fourth attempt worked. Nibelungen Lied, the epic poem about a cursed ring of gold and the destruction it brought, about betrayal and revenge and the way greed destroyed everything it touched. How perfectly appropriate. How perfectly David. The messages to Hoffman were in complex legal German, mixed with references to old High German texts, to medieval literature, to the kind of obscure knowledge that demonstrated education and superiority. David was convincing him that Volkov was unreliable, that the Russians' connections would fall through, that the force majeure clause in their agreement could be triggered to seize the Baltic port assets. Hoffman could cut Volkov out entirely, take his stake, eliminate a partner who was more liability than asset. All he had to do was wait for the right moment and strike, and David would provide that moment, would create the conditions for Volkov's removal. For Volkov's files, Catherine sat for a long time, thinking about Russian literature, about what David would choose. Then she remembered his favorite Pushkin poem, the one he used to quote when he wanted to sound cultured, when he wanted to impress people at department parties. She found the first line, translated it into Cyrillic, and tried it. The files opened. David had been more direct with Volkov, speaking in Russian slang mixed with literary references, using the kind of crude language that men used when they thought they were being clever, when they thought vulgarity was honesty. He was telling the oligarch that Hoffman and Nakamura were security risks, that they would eventually be caught by their governments, that Volkov should use his connections to have them declared threats to Russian interests, to nullify their shares through legal maneuvering that was legal only in the loosest possible interpretation of the word. There was talk of a shell corporation in Cyprus, of asset liquidation, of the kind of financial engineering that turned billions into ghosts, into money that existed but couldn't be traced, couldn't be taxed, couldn't be regulated. By Friday morning at 10 a.m., Catherine had been working for over 50 hours with maybe 4 hours of sleep total. Her eyes burned from staring at screens. Her back ached from hunching over keyboards. Her hands cramped from typing. But she had a complete map of David Sterling's treachery. He had played all three partners against each other, promised each of them the crown, positioned himself to be the sole beneficiary when the whole thing imploded. And she had found the final piece, the one that made her stomach turn, the one that proved he was using the exact same playbook he had used on her 3 years ago. A press release, drafted and ready to go, dated for the Monday after the wire transfers cleared. An anonymous whistleblower leak detailing Project Chimera and every illegal aspect of it. The sanctions violations, the bribery, the conspiracy, all laid out in excruciating detail with supporting documentation. And the person named as the architect of the entire criminal conspiracy was not David Sterling. It was Marcus Blackwell. The same playbook. Frame the boss. Take the company. David had done it to her at the State Department. Now he was doing it to Blackwell at Blackwell Industries. And he had probably planned it from the moment he took the job, had probably seen the opportunity, had probably recognized in Blackwell another powerful person whose destruction would elevate him. He's a true artist, Catherine said, printing the last of the evidence, her voice hollow with the realization of just how thoroughly David had planned this, how completely he had set it up. I have to give him credit. This is masterful. Diabolical, but masterful. He's a dead man, Blackwell replied through the intercom, his voice cold as winter, as absolute as gravity. Catherine looked at her watch. It was Friday, 11 a.m. She had been working non-stop, pausing only for bathroom breaks and coffee, sustained by adrenaline and rage and the pure focus that came from finally having the power to fight back. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Thinking about you. You got this, Hermana. Kick his ass. Another from Grace. Remember, baby, justice, not revenge. Don't let him make you into something you're not. Catherine smiled despite her exhaustion, despite the weight of what she had discovered, despite the knowledge that in less than an hour, she would walk into a room and destroy a man's life the way he had destroyed hers. She wasn't alone. She had never really been alone. She had just forgotten how to see the people who loved her, who supported her, who wanted her to win. She gathered the printed evidence, organized it into folders with tabs and labels, created a comprehensive brief that laid out the entire conspiracy with supporting documentation. She worked with the precision of someone who had written intelligence reports for ambassadors, who knew how to present complex information clearly, who understood that evidence was only useful if it could be understood. When she was done, she walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked terrible, exhausted, underdressed, hair falling out of its knot, dark circles under her eyes. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't seen in 3 years. Strength, purpose, the woman who had once helped negotiate peace, the woman who believed her mind mattered. She splashed cold water on her face, fixed her hair, straightened her shoulders. Then she walked out to Blackwell's main office and placed the folders on his desk with hands that were finally steady. I have everything, she said. Every betrayal, every side deal, every piece of his plan. He was going to frame you exactly the way he framed me. Same playbook, same pattern, same arrogance. He thought no one would see it coming because no one had seen it the first time. Blackwell turned from the windows, and his face was the cold rage of a man who had been beaten at his own game. A man who prided himself on being smarter than everyone and had just learned he had been outmaneuvered. But there was also something else there. Respect. Grudging, but real. The video conference is in 45 minutes, he said. Dr. Morrison, I want you to join me. I want you there when I expose him. I want him to see your face when he realizes what he's lost, when he understands that the woman he destroyed has destroyed him in return. Catherine thought about that. Thought about being in the room when David's world ended. Thought about seeing his face when he realized she had won. The old Catherine, the one who had spent 3 years obsessing over his photo on her wall, would have said yes immediately, would have craved that moment of vindication. But she was different now. The last 50 hours had changed her. Solving his puzzles had felt like reclaiming pieces of herself. Using her mind had reminded her who she was beyond her anger. And Grace's words kept echoing, justice, not revenge. I don't need to be there, she said quietly. I don't need to see his face. This investigation, these 50 hours of work, that was my revenge. Every file I opened was another piece of his life ending. Every password I cracked was another nail in his coffin. I've already won. I don't need him to see it. Blackwell studied her for a long moment. You're better than I am, more disciplined. I would want to watch him burn. I did watch him burn for 50 hours, that's enough. Then go home, Dr. Morrison. Go sleep. And when you wake up, check the news, and then we'll talk about what comes next. Catherine nodded, picked up her bag, and walked to the door. Then she paused and turned back. Thank you, she said, for believing me, for giving me a chance, for seeing me when I thought I was invisible. Thank you, Blackwell replied, for reminding me that the most dangerous person in the room isn't always the one with the most money. The elevator ride down felt like falling, like descending from clouds to earth. When she reached the lobby, Sophia was there somehow, must have tracked her down through sheer determination. "You did it," Sophia said, not a question. "I did it." "Good. Now let's get you home before you collapse." They took a taxi because Catherine was too tired for the subway, and Sophia kept up a steady stream of chatter about nothing important, just filling the silence, just being present. When they arrived at Grace's brownstone, her mother was waiting on the steps, and Catherine fell into her arms like a child, like she used to after bad days at school. "It's done," she whispered. "Me? It's really done." "Then come inside. Come inside, baby, come rest, the world can wait." Catherine spent the next 12 hours in her childhood bed, sleeping the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that came from complete exhaustion. When she woke, it was late Friday evening. Grace was sitting in the chair by her window, keeping watch. "There's news," Grace said gently, holding up her phone. The headline read, "Blackwell Industries exposes massive internal fraud. VP David Sterling arrested on federal charges." Catherine stared at it, at the proof that it was real, that he had really lost, that justice had really happened. And she felt the strangest thing, not triumph, not even satisfaction, just relief. Just the slow release of 3 years of rage draining away, leaving space for something else, something she hadn't felt in so long she had forgotten its name. "Peace. He's gone," Grace said, depleted. "I know. How do you feel?" "Empty. But the good kind of empty. Like a weight I've been carrying is finally gone. Like I can breathe again." Grace smiled, came to sit on the edge of the bed. "That's healing, baby. That's what it feels like when you let go of poison, when you choose yourself over revenge." "I thought I would feel more triumphant." "Triumph is loud. Peace is quiet. You got justice. Now you get to build something new from the space that revenge used to fill." Over the weekend, Catherine let herself rest. Really rest. Not the exhausted collapse of the last 3 years, but true restoration. She slept when she was tired. She ate food her mother made. She laughed with Sophia about silly things. She sat in the garden and felt the October sun on her face. On Monday morning, a package arrived, the press release clearing her name, the letter from the State Department, and a new contract from Blackwell, amended to include full autonomy and additional resources for whatever she wanted to build. Her phone rang all day. Georgetown, the UN, former colleagues. She listened to the voicemails with a strange detachment, like they were talking to someone else, someone who no longer existed. That evening, she called Sophia. "I need your help building something," Catherine said. "Something that matters." "Tell me." "I'm taking Blackwell's offer, but not to make myself powerful. To help everyone like me. Every woman who's been destroyed by a David Sterling. I want to build a fund. Legal support, career counseling, mentorship, everything I wished I had. And I need you to help me run it." "When do we start?" "Now." Catherine Morrison hung up the phone and looked out at the city where she had fallen and risen, where she had been destroyed and rebuilt, where she had learned that invisible could be powerful, and that justice was something you built with your own hands. The future was no longer blank. It was being written right now, in this moment, in this choice. And for the first time in 3 years, Catherine Morrison felt something other than rage. She felt hope. Heavy silence filled the boardroom after the doors closed on David Sterling's screams. Catherine stood perfectly still, her hands no longer clasped behind her back, but trembling slightly at her sides. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving behind the kind of exhaustion that came from holding yourself together when everything inside wanted to shatter. She had done it. She had actually exposed him. The man who had destroyed her life was being dragged away by security, his expensive suit rumpled, his composure shattered, his perfect mask finally broken. And she felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where rage had lived for 3 years. Marcus Blackwell turned back to the screen where 3 faces stared in various states of shock and rage. Klaus Hoffman was pale and sweating, his military precision dissolved into panic. Roman Volkov looked like a man who had just watched his fortune evaporate, his jovial mask completely gone. Kenji Nakamura sat motionless, but his eyes held the kind of calculation that meant he was already working through damage control, already planning his next move. "Now, gentlemen," Blackwell said, straightening his tie with the calm of a man who had just won a war. His voice was steady, controlled, the voice of a predator who had cornered his prey and was savoring the moment. "As you've just witnessed, Project Chimera is dead. It was a criminal enterprise from its inception, built on fraud and mutual betrayal. Here is your new reality." He sat down at the head of the table, steepled his fingers, and became the man Catherine had seen at the Meridian. Patient, dangerous, completely in control. This was his element. This was what he did best. Dr. Morrison has in her possession enough evidence to have all three of you arrested and extradited for conspiracy to violate international sanctions, wire fraud, bribery, and a host of other crimes that will put you in concrete cells for a very long time. Your assets will be seized. Your companies will be dismantled. Your reputations will be destroyed. Your families will suffer. Your legacies will be the cautionary tales we tell about greed and stupidity. He let that sink in, watched them squirm, gave them time to fully comprehend the magnitude of their exposure. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. Catherine could hear Hoffman's breathing through the speakers, rapid and shallow. "Or," Blackwell continued, his voice softening just slightly, a predator offering mercy he didn't have to give. "You listen to a new proposal." Dr. Morrison, in her audit, discovered that the underlying technology, stripped of its illegal applications, is actually brilliant, revolutionary even. She spent last night designing a new project. We're calling it Project Aegis, the Shield. It is fully compliant with all international regulations, completely legal, transparently structured, and, according to her projections, will be twice as profitable as Chimera within 3 years, possibly more. Catherine stepped forward, her legs steadier now, her voice finding its strength again. She placed a hand on the back of a chair to ground herself and spoke directly to the screen, to 3 men who had dismissed her as furniture just days ago. "You will not be partners," she said, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "You will be suppliers, exclusive suppliers with restrictive contracts. All communications will be routed through me. Every email, every phone call, every document. I will have full, unrestricted audit access to your operations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You will operate with complete transparency. You will do exactly as I say when I say it, without question or hesitation. And in return, you will make a great deal of money. You will avoid prison. You will keep your families intact. You will have a second chance you absolutely do not deserve." She paused, let them absorb this. "But understand this clearly. One misstep, one lie, one attempt to circumvent my oversight, and I will personally deliver every piece of evidence I have to the Department of Justice, Interpol, and every regulatory body in 3 continents. You will spend the rest of your lives in prison. Your choice. Prosperity under my watch, or destruction under your own stupidity." Blackwell smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a shark who had just tasted blood. "Dr. Morrison will send you the new contracts within the hour. You have 60 minutes to sign, not 61. 60. Welcome to the new Blackwell Industries, where competence matters more than connections, and where Dr. Morrison's word is law." He reached out and with a single tap ended the call. The screen went dark, cutting off Hoffman's sputtering protest mid-syllable. The silence that followed was profound. Catherine felt her knees go weak, felt the floor tilt slightly, felt the full weight of what she had just done settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. She had done it. She had actually done it. David Sterling was gone. The conspiracy was exposed. Justice had been served, and she felt nothing, not triumph, not satisfaction, just a vast, echoing emptiness where rage had lived for 3 years, and the slow, creeping question of what came next. Blackwell walked to a polished wood cabinet and took out a bottle of whiskey. Not the Yamazaki from the restaurant. Something older, something that probably cost more than her car. He poured 2 glasses neat, brought one to Catherine, pressed it into her shaking hand. "Aegis," he said, raising his glass. "The shield of the gods. Good name. Better than Chimera. That was always a bad omen. Monsters don't last. Shields endure. It seemed appropriate, Catherine managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. You have a gift, Dr. Morrison. You don't just translate languages. You speak the one that actually matters in this world. The one that no machine can replicate. The one that separates the powerful from the pretenders. What language is that? Leverage, Blackwell said, his eyes bright with something that might have been respect. The only one everyone understands. The only one that makes men like Hoffman and Volkov and Nakamura bend the knee. You held their lives in your hands and they knew it. That's power. Real power. He touched his glass to hers, the crystal ringing like a bell, a sound that seemed to echo in the vast space. Welcome to the company, permanently, if you'll have us. I'm offering you a partnership, not employment, not a salary with bonuses. 50% ownership of a new division focused on risk analysis and international compliance. You build the team, you set the strategy. You hire who you want, fire who you want. You answer only to me, and only when you feel like it. You make the rules, you enforce the rules, and you get compensated accordingly. Catherine looked at him, this man who had mocked her days ago, who had called her sweetheart and laughed at her languages, who had dismissed her as nothing. Why? Because you just saved me from federal prison and financial ruin. Because you see things I don't. Because you think in ways that I can't. And frankly, because I'm tired of rooms full of men who think like David Sterling. Men who mistake cruelty for strength, who confuse ambition with intelligence. My mother always said hire women. They see what men miss. They build where men destroy. She was right. She was always right. He took a drink, set down his glass. But more than that, Dr. Morrison, you scare me, in a good way. You walked into my boardroom and dismantled 3 billionaires and a conspiracy with nothing but your mind. You did in 48 hours what my entire security team couldn't do in 6 months. I don't want to compete with you. I want to work with you. I want you on my side. Because if you can do that to them, I don't want to imagine what you could do to me. Catherine felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not fear, but the slow recognition that she had power now. Real power, the kind that changed lives, the kind that could build or destroy. I need to think about it, she said. Fair enough. Take the weekend. But, Dr. Morrison, don't underestimate what you've accomplished here. You didn't just stop a crime. You built something better. You took their greed and stupidity and turned it into something that might actually help people. That's not revenge. That's alchemy. Catherine nodded, drained her whiskey in one burning swallow that brought tears to her eyes, and walked out of the boardroom on legs that barely held her. The elevator ride down felt like falling. 50 floors of glass and steel, descending from the clouds back to earth, and Catherine watched her reflection in the polished doors. She looked different. Not just the suit, not just the hair. Something in her eyes had changed. Something that had been broken was whole again. Or maybe not whole, maybe just different. Maybe healing looked like scars instead of smoothness. Sophia was waiting in the lobby, bouncing on her toes with nervous energy, her phone clutched in both hands like a lifeline. When she saw Catherine emerge from the elevator, she rushed forward and pulled her into a fierce hug right there in the marble hall where everyone could see, where the security guards watched and the other employees stared. You did it, Sophia whispered against Catherine's shoulder. I can see it on your face. You actually did it. Tell me everything. Tell me he's destroyed. Tell me you won. Catherine held on to her, this young woman who had become her sister in all the ways that mattered, and finally let herself feel it. Not triumph, not revenge, but something quieter and more profound. She had survived. She had risen. She had become someone she could be proud of, someone her father would have been proud of. I won, she said simply. And I'm so tired, Sophia. I'm so tired I could sleep for a week. Then let's get you home, to your mother, to Grace. They took the subway to Brooklyn, Catherine still in her sapphire suit, Sophia chattering about her marketing class and her new internship application, and whether Catherine thought the blue blazer or the black one was better for interviews. Catherine let the words wash over her, grateful for the distraction, for the reminder that the world was bigger than boardrooms and betrayal, that life continued in its small, beautiful, ordinary ways. Even when your own world was ending or beginning or whatever this was. The subway car was crowded with the late afternoon rush, students with backpacks, construction workers still dusty from job sites, women in scrubs heading to night shifts at hospitals, the beautiful anonymous diversity of New York, everyone with their own struggles and triumphs and stories. Catherine felt herself relax into the rhythm of it, into the familiar sway and clatter, into the simple fact of being one person among millions, unremarkable and unnoticed. Cat, Sophia's voice pulled her back. Are you okay? You're crying. Catherine touched her face, surprised to find it wet. She hadn't even realized. I'm fine, I don't know, I feel everything and nothing all at once. Sophia squeezed her hand. That's called being human. You've been running on anger for 3 years. Now that it's gone, you have to feel all the other stuff, the scary stuff, like what comes next. What comes next? Catherine echoed. I have no idea. That's the exciting part. You get to choose. Grace was in the kitchen when they arrived, making soup even though it was barely noon, because mothers always knew when their children needed feeding. The brownstones smelled like home, like chicken broth and fresh bread and the lavender sachets Grace kept in every closet, like safety, like unconditional love. Grace took one look at Catherine's face and opened her arms. It's done, Catherine said, stepping into her mother's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of her, the hand cream Grace had used for 40 years, and the faint smell of the garden soil from this morning's planting. Did you get your justice? I think so. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Grace pulled back, cupped Catherine's face in her hands that were spotted with age now but still strong, still capable of holding her daughter's world together. That's because revenge is loud, but justice is quiet. Revenge screams and demands and insists you feel something. Justice just is. It doesn't need your validation. Give yourself time to feel it. Give yourself time to understand what you've done. Sophia helped herself to soup, comfortable in Grace's kitchen in the way that chosen family became comfortable, moving around the space like she had grown up there. And the 3 women sat around the table that had witnessed Catherine's childhood, and her destruction, and now her rebuilding. And they ate soup and talked about everything and nothing. What happens now? Sophia asked. The same question she had asked on the subway, but gentler now, less urgent. I don't know, Catherine admitted. Blackwell offered me a partnership. Real power, real money, a chance to build something. Are you going to take it? I don't know that either. 3 years ago, I would have jumped at it. Power, influence, the chance to matter. But now I don't know if I want to be in that world. The boardrooms and the power games and the constant fight. I've been fighting for 3 years. I'm tired. Grace set down her spoon, looked at her daughter with eyes that had always seen deeper than surface things, eyes that had watched Catherine learn to walk and read and drive and dream. What do you want, baby? Catherine opened her mouth to answer and realized she had no idea. For 3 years, she had wanted one thing: to make David Sterling pay, to reclaim what he had stolen, to prove she hadn't deserved what happened to her, to be seen again, to matter again. And now that she had it, now that justice had been served, she didn't know what came next. The future was a blank page, and she had forgotten how to write on anything but anger. I want to rest, she said finally. I want to sleep for a week. I want to not think about David Sterling or Marcus Blackwell or Project Chimera or Project Aegis. I want to just be for a while. No goals, no plans, no fight, just being. Then do that, Grace said simply, like it was the easiest thing in the world. The rest will still be there when you're ready. The partnership, the decisions, the future. It can all wait. You've earned the right to rest. Catherine spent the weekend in her childhood bed, sleeping 12 hours at a time, waking to her mother's cooking and Sophia's visits and the simple peace of being home. She turned off her phone. She didn't check email. She let herself be nothing for the first time in 3 years, and it felt like the greatest luxury in the world, like breathing after being underwater, like warmth after endless cold. On Saturday afternoon, she woke to find Grace sitting in the chair by her window, reading in the afternoon light that painted everything gold. Catherine watched her mother for a long moment, taking in the silver hair and the reading glasses perched on her nose, and the way her lips moved slightly as she read, a habit she had never broken. How long have you been there? Catherine asked. Grace looked up, smiled. About an hour. I wanted to make sure you were really sleeping, not just lying there thinking. I was really sleeping. Good. You needed it. Catherine sat up, pulled her knees to her chest. The room looked exactly as it had when she was 17. Posters of faraway places on the walls, books stacked on every surface, the quilt her grandmother had made, each square a different pattern, a different memory. Me, can I ask you something? Always. When Dad died, how did you know what to do next? How did you know who you were without him? Grace set down her book, took off her glasses, and Catherine saw her mother's eyes fill with tears. They rarely talked about this. About the man who had died 5 years ago, who had taught Catherine to read and love words and see beauty in languages. I didn't know, Grace said softly. For a long time, I didn't know. Your father and I were married for 38 years. We grew up together. I was 18 when we met, 19 when we married. I had never been Grace without him. I didn't know how. What did you do? I let myself grieve. I let myself be angry. I let myself be lost. And then slowly, I started to find pieces of myself I had forgotten. I remembered that I loved teaching. I loved my garden. I loved Sunday dinners with you. I loved reading Austen and Dickens and getting lost in other people's stories. I built a life around those small loves, and eventually that became enough. Catherine felt tears on her own cheeks now. I miss him. I know, baby. I miss him too, every day. But he would be so proud of you, of who you've become, of how you fought back, of how you chose grace over revenge. Did I choose grace, or did I just run out of anger? Grace smiled, reached out to take Catherine's hand. Does it matter? Either way, you're here. You survived. You won. And now you get to choose what comes next. That's the gift he would want for you, the freedom to choose. On Monday morning, Catherine woke to find a package on the doorstep. Inside was a letter from Blackwell's lawyers, legal documents dense with clauses and terms, and a press release, already distributed to every major news outlet. After extensive re-examination of evidence in the 2022 Kovalchuk memo leak, new information has come to light that fully exonerates Dr. Catherine Morrison of all wrongdoing. An internal investigation has revealed that the leak was orchestrated by former State Department employee David Sterling, who has since been terminated from Blackwell Industries and is currently in federal custody facing multiple charges including fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the Espionage Act. The State Department extends its sincerest apologies to Dr. Morrison for the miscarriage of justice she endured. Her security clearance has been reinstated, and a formal letter of apology will be sent to all relevant parties, including Georgetown University and the United Nations. Catherine read it 3 times, her hand shaking. She was cleared, publicly, officially. Her name was clean. The stain was gone. She could go back. She could reclaim everything. Her phone, which she had finally turned back on, began to ring. Georgetown University, offering to republish her dissertation with a formal apology for their previous disavowal. The United Nations, asking if she would consider returning to her former position, offering a pay increase and a title promotion. 3 different universities, offering guest lecturer positions with generous compensation. Former colleagues she hadn't heard from in 3 years, suddenly eager to reconnect, their messages filled with awkward apologies and transparent attempts to benefit from her vindication. She answered none of them. Instead, she called Sophia. I need you, she said when the younger woman picked up. I need to build something, and I can't do it alone. Tell me what you need. I need you to quit school for a semester. Come work with me. Help me build something that matters. There was a pause. Then Sophia's voice, bright and certain, I'm in. Whatever it is, I'm in. 6 months later, Catherine Morrison stood in her new corner office at Blackwell Industries and looked out at Manhattan spread beneath her like a promise kept. The title on her door read Chief Risk Officer, but that didn't begin to capture what she actually did. She had built a department from nothing, hired a team of analysts, linguists, compliance experts, people who had been overlooked and underestimated, created systems for monitoring international compliance that were being adopted by companies across 3 continents. And most importantly, she had started something she called Project Phoenix. It was Sophia's idea, actually. They had been having lunch in the cafeteria. Catherine explaining her new role and the resources at her disposal. When Sophia had said, "You should help other women like you, women who got screwed over and need a second chance. You have the money now. You have the platform. Use it." The idea had taken root immediately, flowering in Catherine's mind with the kind of clarity that said this was right. This was what she was meant to do. She had gone to Blackwell with a proposal, a fund to help women who had been wrongfully terminated, blackballed, destroyed by corporate politics or vindictive men, or the 1,000 ways the system crushed people who threatened it. Legal support, career counseling, financial assistance, mentorship programs, everything Catherine wished she had when her world collapsed. Blackwell had approved it immediately, allocated $5 million for the first year, and told her to do whatever she thought was right. "You've earned my trust," he said simply. "Don't make me regret it." Now, 6 months in, Project Phoenix had helped 15 women rebuild their careers. Accountants and engineers and lawyers and teachers, all of them brilliant, all of them destroyed by systems that protected the powerful and crushed the vulnerable. Catherine interviewed each one personally, saw herself in their faces, saw the particular pain of being dismissed and discarded, and gave them what no one had given her: a chance. Sophia had graduated NYU summa cum laude and turned down 6 corporate offers to work at Blackwell as Catherine's right hand, her chief of staff, her sister in everything but blood. Together they conducted the interviews, reviewed the applications, made the decisions about who to help and how. And then Linda Chen had walked into Catherine's office 3 months ago with a surprising proposal. "I'm leaving the Meridian," she had said without preamble. "I've been there 15 years. I've learned what I needed to learn. Now I want to do something that matters. What are you proposing? Hire me. Make me your COO. Let me bring my experience in managing people and systems. Let me help you build this thing into something that lasts beyond you and me, something institutional, something that can't be destroyed when we're gone." Catherine had hired her on the spot. Now the 3 of them worked together in a suite of offices on the 47th floor, building something that felt more important than anything Catherine had done before. More important than translating for ambassadors. More important than exposing conspiracies. This was personal. This was real. This was women helping women climb back up from the rubble. But it wasn't just professional success that had changed Catherine's life. It wasn't just the corner office and the partnership and the satisfaction of meaningful work. It was something quieter, something she hadn't expected, something that arrived in the form of a man with kind eyes and gentle hands, and a quiet strength that came from having survived his own disasters. His name was James Chen, and he was Linda's younger brother, though at 52 he hardly qualified as young. He was an architect, divorced for 7 years, with 2 grown children who lived across the country pursuing their own lives. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and hands scarred from working with models and materials, from building things with his own 2 hands instead of just drawing them. Catherine met him at a family dinner that Linda had insisted she attend, one of those casual Friday night gatherings that Linda hosted monthly, opening her apartment to anyone who needed family. Grace was there too, because Linda had adopted the Morrison women into her life with the same fierce loyalty she brought to everything. James had been seated next to Catherine by design. Linda's matchmaking so obvious, it would have been funny if Catherine wasn't so rusty at this, if her heart wasn't so carefully guarded after David's betrayal. They spent the evening talking about buildings and languages, and the strange parallel between designing structures and designing meaning, about how both required understanding what was unsaid, what was implied, what held things together when you couldn't see the supports. "My sister says you're extraordinary," James said as they helped with dishes, the kind of comfortable domestic task that revealed character. His hands moved efficiently, rinsing plates before handing them to her to dry. "Your sister saved my life. She says you saved hers too." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm. "She says you reminded her why she survived her own disaster, that watching you rebuild gave her permission to rebuild too." Catherine felt her throat tighten. "I didn't know that." "Linda doesn't say things like that lightly. You matter to her, which means you matter to me." He called her 3 days later and asked if she would like to get coffee. She said yes before she could overthink it, before fear could talk her out of trying again. Their first date was a walk along the High Line, the elevated park that snaked through Manhattan's West Side, gardens blooming in impossible places, green life thriving where trains used to run. They talked for 3 hours, about his failed marriage and her destroyed career, about second chances and starting over, and the peculiar courage it took to trust again after betrayal. "My ex-wife had an affair," James said, his hands in his pockets, his gait unhurried. "With my former business partner. They're married now, have a baby. Sometimes I see their Christmas card and I feel nothing. Not anger, not pain, just nothing. Is that healing or just numbness?" "I think it's both," Catherine said. "I think healing looks like scar tissue, different from the original, stronger in some ways, weaker in others, but whole again." "What does your scar tissue feel like?" Catherine thought about it. About David Sterling in federal custody awaiting trial. About the 3 years of rage that had sustained her. About the moment that rage had drained away, leaving something else in its place. "Like I'm lighter," she said. "Like I was carrying something heavy for so long I forgot it was there. And now it's gone and I don't know how to walk without it. I keep expecting to feel its weight, but there's just air." James stopped walking, turned to face her. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in years." "Is that good or bad?" "It's real, and real is rare." He took her to a Japanese art exhibition on their third date, to the Met's collection of Edo period prints and scrolls, and Catherine found herself translating the gallery text for him, explaining the cultural context and historical significance of each piece. He listened with complete attention, asked thoughtful questions, never tried to perform his own knowledge or compete with hers. "Watching you talk about language is like watching someone illuminate a dark room," he said, as they stood before a massive scroll depicting a legendary battle. "You don't just explain it, you bring it to life. You make me see things I would have missed." "It's just information." "No," he said gently. "It's passion, it's intelligence, it's beautiful." No one had called her beautiful in years. Not her face, not her body, but her mind, her passion. The thing that David had mocked, the thing that Blackwell had laughed at. James saw it and called it beautiful. She kissed him right there in the gallery, impulsive and sudden, and he caught her face in his hands and kissed her back with a kind of tenderness that made her want to cry. On their fifth date, he cooked dinner at his apartment in Brooklyn, a brownstone he had designed himself, all clean lines and natural light, and the kind of thoughtful detail that came from understanding how people actually lived in spaces. He made pasta from scratch, rolling the dough with practiced efficiency, and she watched him work, comfortable in his kitchen, comfortable in his life. They talked until midnight, curled on his couch with wine and the easy intimacy of people who were discovering they fit together in unexpected ways. And when he walked her to the door, he asked permission before he kissed her, a question in his eyes that said her consent mattered more than his desire. The kiss was gentle and tentative and sweet, and Catherine felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not for justice or vindication or professional success. Hope for something simpler and infinitely more complicated. Connection. Love. A future built on choice instead of fear. "I haven't felt this in a long time," she whispered, when they finally pulled apart, her forehead resting against his. "Neither have I," James said, his voice rough. "We can go slow. There's no rush. We have time." And they did go slow. Weeks of dinners and museums and long conversations that spanned topics, from architecture to loss to the small, beautiful details of ordinary life. Meeting each other's families, Grace falling in love with him immediately, declaring him a good man with gentle hands and a kind heart, the highest praise she could give. His children coming to visit for Thanksgiving, welcoming Catherine with the cautious warmth of adults who wanted their father to be happy, but were protecting old wounds. No pressure, no expectations, no deadlines, just two people who had been broken learning to be whole together, learning to trust that this time, this person, this chance was real. Catherine told him everything, about David and the frame-up and the 3 years of being invisible, about the restaurant and the boardroom and the choice she had made between revenge and justice. She told him about the wall in her old apartment covered with David Sterling's face, about the obsession that had kept her alive but had also kept her imprisoned. He listened without trying to fix it, without offering solutions or advice, just being present with her pain, holding space for her story. He told her about his divorce, about his wife's infidelity, about the years he spent angry before he realized that anger was poisoning only him, about learning to forgive not because she deserved it, but because he deserved peace, about the nights he spent alone in this brownstone he had designed for a family that no longer existed, wondering if he would always be alone. They were both wounded, both healing, both willing to try again despite everything they had lost. And that willingness, that courage to be vulnerable again, was its own kind of love. "Thank you for being patient with me," Catherine said one night, 3 months into their relationship, curled against him on his couch, both of them fully clothed, just holding each other in the particular intimacy that came before physical intimacy, the emotional nakedness that was harder and more meaningful. "Thank you for letting me in," James replied, his hand stroking her hair with the gentleness that defined him. "Thank you for trusting me with your broken pieces. Thank you for believing I won't cut myself on them." "What if I can't be what you need?" The fear finally surfacing. "What if I'm too damaged? What if David broke something in me that can't be fixed?" James pulled back so he could see her face, so she could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "Catherine Morrison, you are not broken. You are healing. There's a difference. Broken means destroyed. Healing means becoming. You're not what you were 3 years ago. You're something new, something stronger, something that chose grace over bitterness. That's not broken, that's extraordinary." She cried then, the kind of tears that came from being seen completely and not being rejected, from being known and being chosen anyway, from realizing that maybe, just maybe, David Sterling hadn't destroyed her capacity for love. He had just delayed it. Grace called it a blessing. Sophia called it adorable. Linda just smiled knowingly and said she had planned it all along, that she had known from the first moment they met that Catherine needed someone like James, someone gentle enough to handle her carefully, but strong enough to push back when she tried to hide. Catherine called it unexpected grace, the kind of gift you didn't know you needed until it arrived, the kind of love that came in middle age, after the fire and passion of youth had been tempered by experience. Quieter, deeper, built on friendship and respect, and the knowledge that they were choosing each other with open eyes, with full awareness of each other's scars and flaws and the ways they had both been broken by life. It was the kind of love that lasted, the kind that could weather storms because it was built on bedrock instead of sand. And for the first time in years, Catherine let herself believe in forever. The return to the Meridian happened on a Friday evening in late spring, 6 months after that first family dinner, 6 months of slowly falling in love and learning to trust again. James suggested it for their half-year anniversary, wanted to take her somewhere nice, somewhere special. Catherine had been avoiding this place, this site of her invisibility, of her 3 years serving people who never saw her. But James wanted to go, and she realized she needed to face it, not as a ghost, but as herself. They were seated at table 12, one of the good tables by the window with a view of the street, of the city moving past in its endless motion. The Meridian looked exactly the same, white linen, crystal chandeliers, the quiet hum of wealth, but Catherine felt completely different walking through it. She was wearing a simple dress James had complimented, navy blue with a delicate silver necklace, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was not hiding. She was not invisible. She was herself. Their server approached, a young woman with nervous energy and an accent Catherine immediately placed as Eastern European. Her name tag read Elena. "Good evening, I'm Elena and I'll be your server tonight. May I start you with some water?" Catherine looked at her, really looked at her the way no one had looked at Catherine for 3 years, and saw what no one else would see. The intelligence in her eyes that she was carefully dampening, the competence she was hiding, the way she held herself like someone who was used to being more than this, but had learned to be invisible for survival. "Sparkling, please," James said. Of course, sir. And for you, ma'am?" Catherine made a decision that would change both their lives. "Still, thank you. Your accent is beautiful. Check?" Elena's eyes widened, just slightly, surprise breaking through her professional mask for a fraction of a second. "Yes, ma'am. You have very good ear." "I speak a little Czech." Catherine said, switching languages with the ease of breathing. How long have you been in New York? Elena's hands trembled, just for a moment, before she caught herself and forced them steady. 8 months, ma'am, she replied in Czech, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking her native language in this place was dangerous. What did you do in Prague? A pause, a calculation, a decision about whether truth was safe. Then quietly, carefully, I was translator for government. Catherine felt something crack open in her chest. Recognition and empathy and the particular pain of seeing yourself in someone else's suffering. She knew. She knew before Elena said another word exactly what had happened. The same story, the same betrayal, the same fall. What languages do you speak? She asked gently, her Czech flawless, her tone kind. 12, ma'am. Elena's voice was hollow. But it doesn't matter here. No one cares. No one asks. It matters, Catherine said, switching back to English, her voice firm. It always matters. Your mind matters. Your skills matter. You matter. Elena brought their water with shaking hands, took their orders with perfect efficiency, and disappeared into the background the way Catherine had once disappeared. But Catherine watched her move through the room, watched the intelligence she was hiding, the competence she was forced to diminish, the way she made herself small and invisible and safe. You see yourself in her, James said quietly, reaching across the table to take her hand. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who loves you. He squeezed her fingers. What are you going to do? Catherine thought about it through dinner, through the excellent Chilean sea bass and the perfectly prepared asparagus and the wine that probably cost what Elena made in a week. She thought about the 3 years she had spent invisible, about how no one had helped her, about the wall in her old apartment covered with David Sterling's face, about the rage that had sustained her and the grace that had freed her. She thought about Project Phoenix and the 15 women she had already helped, about Sophia and Linda and Grace, and the network of support that had saved her when she was drowning, about the fact that she had power now, real power, the power to change lives. After dinner, when Elena brought the check, Catherine asked to speak with her privately. The younger woman approached their table with the wariness of someone who had learned that attention from wealthy diners was usually dangerous, usually led to propositions or complaints, or the 1,000 small humiliations of service work. Is something wrong with the service, ma'am? No, the service was perfect. Please, sit down for just a moment. Elena glanced around nervously, at Ms. Chen watching from the hostess stand, at the other servers who might notice, but she sat on the edge of the chair like she might need to bolt. Why did you leave Prague? Catherine asked gently, in Czech, giving her the gift of her native language. Elena's face closed down, walls going up. Political situation. Had to leave. Political situation or something more specific, something personal? A long pause. Catherine waited. She had learned patience in her own suffering. Then, in a voice so quiet, Catherine had to lean in to hear it. I was accused of something I didn't do. Leak of classified information. I was framed by a colleague, a male colleague who I rejected romantically. He couldn't accept that I was better translator and also didn't want him, so he destroyed my career. Catherine's vision blurred for a moment. It was the same story. The exact same story, just a different country, a different man, a different woman, but the same fundamental injustice, the same abuse of power, the same punishment for being competent and female and unwilling to be owned. What was his name? Catherine asked, though she knew it didn't matter. There were 1,000 David Sterlings in the world, 1,000 men who couldn't bear to lose to a woman. Does it matter? He won. I lost. I'm here. He's there, promoted, successful, laughing at the stupid woman who thought she mattered. Catherine pulled a business card from her purse, the new card with the Project Phoenix logo, her direct number. She placed it on the table between them. This is my card. I'm Chief Risk Officer at Blackwell Industries. More importantly, I run a program called Project Phoenix. We help women who have been wrongfully accused, wrongfully terminated, wrongfully destroyed by systems that protect powerful men. We help them rebuild their careers. I'd like you to call me on Monday. We'll talk about a position. We'll talk about helping you get your life back. Elena stared at the card like it might vanish if she touched it, like it might be a trick or a test or another way the world was preparing to hurt her. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I could be lying. I could be exactly what he said I was. Why would you believe me? Catherine reached across the table and took Elena's hand, this young woman's hand that was rough from work and trembling with hope and fear. Because 3 years ago, I was you. I was exactly you. I spoke 10 languages and I served soup and I was invisible. And a few people helped me. Not many, but enough. Sophia, who's like my sister now. Linda Chen, who saw me when I was nothing. My mother, who never stopped believing in me. They gave me a chance when no one else would. Now it's my turn to give you that chance, to pay forward what was given to me. What if I can't do it? Elena's voice broke. What if I'm too broken? What if 3 years of being nothing has destroyed whatever I was before? What if I've forgotten how to be her? You haven't forgotten, Catherine said with absolute certainty. You're just hidden. And I'm very good at finding hidden things. I'm very good at seeing what other people miss. Trust me, you're not broken, you're just waiting. She stood up, left a tip that was probably more than Elena made in a day, left the card on the table like a promise. James put his arm around her waist as they walked out of the Meridian into the spring evening, the city alive around them with possibility. You're building an army, he said, wonder in his voice. I'm building a family, Catherine corrected. There's a difference. Armies fight, families lift each other up, armies have commanders, families have mothers and sisters and daughters, armies break people, families heal them. I love you, James said, stopping on the sidewalk to kiss her. I love how you see the world. I love how you turn pain into purpose. I love who you're becoming. I love you too, Catherine whispered against his mouth. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for waiting while I figured out how to be whole again. They walked home hand in hand, two middle-aged people who had found each other in the wreckage of their first lives, who were building something new and tender and strong together. And Catherine knew, with the certainty that came from having lost everything and found it again, that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not forgetting the past, but choosing the future. Not being unbroken, but being loved anyway. Scars and all. 1 year, 365 days since Catherine Morrison had walked into a boardroom and reclaimed her life. 365 days since David Sterling had been dragged away in handcuffs, his career destroyed, his freedom forfeited, his reputation reduced to ash. 365 days since everything changed. The Blackwell Industries Anniversary Gala was held on the 50th floor, in the same space where Catherine had once hunted through David's encrypted files with exhausted eyes and shaking hands, where she had cracked his passwords and exposed his betrayal, and proven that invisible didn't mean powerless. But tonight, that conference room had been transformed into something that looked like a dream rendered in glass and light. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed Manhattan glittering below. A constellation of possibilities spread out like a promise. Tables dressed in white and gold filled the space. A string quartet played something elegant and timeless in the corner. Music that spoke of celebration and achievement and futures being built. Catherine stood near the windows in a dress the color of midnight, simple and elegant. Her hair swept up to show the diamond earrings James had given her for their first Christmas together. She was not nervous. She had spoken at the United Nations in 5 languages simultaneously. She had dismantled a billion-dollar conspiracy. She had testified before Congress about corporate fraud and international sanctions violations. She could handle a speech at a corporate gala. But this felt different, more personal, because the people in this room were not just colleagues or business associates, or the powerful elite she had once served invisibly. They were family, chosen and earned, built one act of grace at a time, one woman helped at a time, one life rebuilt at a time. Sophia appeared at her elbow, resplendent in emerald green that made her skin glow, her engagement ring catching the light like captured fire. In the year since Catherine had started Project Phoenix, Sophia had graduated summa cum laude from NYU, turned down 6 corporate offers, and joined Blackwell as Catherine's chief of staff, her right hand, her sister, in everything but blood. You ready? Sophia whispered, squeezing Catherine's hand. As I'll ever be. Marcus Blackwell stepped to the microphone, his presence commanding immediate silence, in the way that money and power always commanded silence. But there was something different about him now. The last year had changed him in ways he probably didn't fully understand, ways that Catherine could see in the softness around his eyes, in the way he smiled more easily, in the fact that he listened before he spoke instead of assuming he already knew the answers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the room with the confidence of someone who had learned that true power came from building people up instead of tearing them down. "Thank you for joining us tonight. 1 year ago, this company faced an existential threat, a conspiracy that could have destroyed everything we built, that could have sent me to federal prison, that could have ruined thousands of lives if it had succeeded. We survived because of one person's courage and brilliance, Dr. Catherine Morrison." Applause filled the room like a wave, washing over Catherine with warmth and appreciation. She felt her cheeks flush, felt the familiar discomfort with being the center of attention, with being seen after so many years of being invisible. But she also felt something else: pride. The quiet, earned pride of knowing she had done something that mattered, that had helped people, that had changed lives. But Dr. Morrison didn't just save Blackwell Industries, Blackwell continued, his voice taking on a weight that said what came next was important, was what he really wanted people to hear. She transformed it. She reminded us what we were supposed to be. Not just a company that makes money, but a company that makes a difference. Project Phoenix, her initiative to help women who have been wrongfully terminated rebuild their careers, has assisted 43 women in its first year. 43 lives changed. 43 families restored. 43 women who thought they were finished discovering that they were just beginning. And that number will only grow. More applause, longer this time. Catherine saw Grace in the crowd, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, pride written across her face in letters so large the whole world could read them. Saw Linda Chen nodding with fierce approval. This woman who had once been a restaurant manager when she should have been a CFO, who now served as Project Phoenix's COO and brought her hard-won wisdom to every decision. Saw Elena, who had been serving tables at the Meridian just a year ago, who now headed Blackwell's Eastern European operations and mentored 3 younger women. Saw James watching her with love written plainly on his face, with the kind of pride that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with witnessing someone you love become who they were meant to be. "I'm going to invite Dr. Morrison to say a few words," Blackwell continued, stepping aside, gesturing to the microphone. "But first, I want to acknowledge something publicly, something I should have said a year ago when I first met her. I was wrong about her, spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. I judged her by her uniform instead of her mind. I laughed when I should have listened. I dismissed her when I should have been grateful that someone as brilliant as her was in my restaurant, on my payroll, anywhere near me. Catherine, I owe you an apology I can never fully make, but I can try to do better. We all can. That's what this company is now, a place that does better." He stepped aside, and Catherine walked forward on legs that were steady now, that no longer shook, that carried her with the confidence of someone who knew her own worth, who had learned it the hard way but had learned it completely. She looked out at the faces watching her and thought about the woman she had been a year ago, invisible, broken, angry, surviving on rage and the desperate hope for revenge. That woman was gone. Someone else stood here now, someone who had chosen grace over bitterness, who had chosen building over burning, who had learned that the most powerful revenge was living well and lifting others as you rose. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying across the room without strain, without fear. "A year ago, I was a waitress. Not because I chose it, but because it was the only option left after my career was destroyed, after I was framed for a crime I didn't commit, after my name was blacklisted and my reputation was ruined, and my future was erased. I served soup to powerful men who never saw me as human. I was invisible. I was nothing." The room was completely silent. The only sound was breathing, was the faint hum of the city outside, was the weight of truth being spoken aloud. But invisibility taught me something valuable. It taught me to see, to listen, to understand that the most overlooked person in any room is often the one who sees everything. And when I finally spoke, when I finally made myself visible again, I did it not for revenge, but for justice. Not to destroy, but to restore. Not to burn bridges, but to build them stronger. She paused, gathered her thoughts, chose her next words carefully because words mattered, because language could heal or harm, could build or destroy. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is about destruction, about making someone suffer the way you suffered, about evening the score. But justice is about restoration, about making things right, not just making things even. Revenge feeds only yourself. Justice feeds everyone. This past year, Project Phoenix has helped 43 women, but those women have helped others. They've mentored younger colleagues. They've hired people who needed chances. They've paid forward what was given to them. That's not revenge. That's grace compounding. That's justice creating more justice. Catherine looked directly at Grace, at her mother who had never stopped believing in her even when Catherine had stopped believing in herself, who had taught her that who you become after you fall matters more than the fall itself. My mother taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, about choosing who you want to be in the aftermath. I fell hard. I lost everything. But I got back up. And I'm standing here tonight not because I destroyed my enemy, though I did expose his crimes and ensure he faced consequences. I'm standing here because I chose to build instead of burn, because I chose grace over bitterness, because I learned that the most powerful language in the world isn't leverage or manipulation. It's love. It's compassion. It's the choice to use your power to lift people instead of crushing them. The applause was thunderous, sustained, people rising to their feet in a standing ovation that went on until Catherine felt tears threatening, until she had to blink them back and remind herself that she was strong now, that crying wasn't weakness, that showing emotion wasn't the same as being broken. She stepped away from the microphone, and immediately Sophia was there, pulling her into a hug. Then Linda, her stern face softening for just a moment. Then Elena. Then a procession of women whose lives had been touched by Project Phoenix, each one offering gratitude and tears and the kind of embrace that said, "You saved me. You saw me. You gave me back my life." Grace pushed through the crowd last, and when she reached Catherine, she simply held her daughter's face in her hands and said 3 words, "Your father knows." It was what Catherine needed to hear, what she had needed to hear for 5 years since his death. The assurance that somewhere, somehow, the man who had taught her to love languages and believe in justice was proud of who she had become, of how she had survived, of the choice she had made to heal instead of staying wounded. I know me, I know. The gala continued for hours. Dinner was served, multiple courses that Catherine barely tasted because people kept stopping by her table to thank her, to share their stories, to tell her what Project Phoenix had meant to them, or to someone they loved. Dancing began, the string quartet giving way to a small jazz band, and the room filled with the kind of joy that came from celebrating not just success, but meaning, not just profit, but purpose. But as the evening wound down, as guests began to drift toward elevators and cars, James appeared at Catherine's side and took her hand. "Come with me," he said quietly, his architect's voice calm and steady, the voice that always grounded her when the world felt too large. "I have something to show you." He led her to a different elevator, one that required a special key, and they rode up 3 more floors to the rooftop, to the private garden that was usually reserved for Blackwell himself. But tonight, it had been transformed. String lights hung overhead like captured stars, creating a canopy of warm light against the night sky. A small table was set with champagne and strawberries. Music played softly from hidden speakers, something classical and romantic that made Catherine's heart skip. "When did you do this?" Catherine asked, her voice hushed with wonder as she took it all in. "I had help. Sophia and your mother are co-conspirators. They've been planning this for weeks." James smiled, that quiet smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and open. "They're very good at keeping secrets." He pulled out a chair for her, poured champagne that caught the light and sparkled like promises. And for a few minutes, they just sat together looking out at the city that had witnessed Catherine's fall and rise, her destruction and rebuilding, her journey from invisible waitress to powerful woman who helped other women find their power. "Catherine Morrison," James said finally, setting down his glass and taking her hand. His architect's hands, scarred from working with models and materials, capable of building beautiful things with patience and precision. 1 year ago, you were rebuilding your life from rubble. You were strong and brilliant and so busy being brave that you forgot how to let anyone in. And somehow miraculously you let me in. He slid from his chair to one knee, and Catherine felt her breath catch, felt time slow down the way it does in moments that will define the rest of your life, the moments that everything else leads to, and everything else flows from. "You showed me what grace looks like," James continued, his voice steady but his hands trembling just slightly, showing that he was nervous, that this mattered, that she mattered. "What courage looks like, what it means to choose love over anger, building over burning, hope over despair. You made me believe in second chances, in new beginnings, in the possibility that the best parts of our lives might still be ahead of us, that falling doesn't mean staying down, that broken can become whole again if you're willing to do the work." He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, opened it to reveal a ring that was simple and elegant and perfect, a single diamond set in platinum that caught the starlight and held it. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me? Will you let me spend the rest of my days watching you change the world, one act of grace at a time? Watching you help women find their voices? Watching you be the person you were always meant to be? Will you choose me the way I choose you? Completely and without reservation, with full knowledge of all my flaws and broken pieces, with eyes wide open to who we really are instead of who we pretend to be." Catherine was crying now, happy tears that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with joy, with the overwhelming realization that she was loved completely, that she had been chosen by a man who saw all of her, the brilliant and the broken, the strong and the scarred, and wanted her anyway. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes, 1,000,000 times yes." The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her hand, like it belonged there, like it was always meant to be there. James stood and pulled her into his arms, and they kissed on that rooftop garden, while the city sparkled below and the future stretched out ahead of them, full of promise and possibility, and the kind of love that came from really knowing someone and choosing them anyway. When they finally came up for air, Catherine laughed and pulled out her phone, knowing she needed to call her mother even though Grace already knew, even though this had been planned. "Me, I'm engaged," she said when Grace answered on the first ring. Grace's cry of joy was so loud that James could hear it even without speakerphone, could hear the pure happiness in her voice, the satisfaction of a mother who had watched her daughter fall and rise and fall again, and now finally find solid ground. "I'm so happy, baby, so happy. Your father would be dancing. He would be so proud of the woman you've become, of the man you've chosen, of the life you're building." They talked for 10 minutes, Grace already planning the wedding even though there was no date set, already imagining flowers and dresses and all the beautiful details that made a wedding more than a ceremony, that made it a celebration of love and family and chosen commitment. When Catherine finally hung up, she found James watching her with the kind of smile that said he understood exactly what family meant to her, why Grace's approval mattered so much, why this moment was about more than just the two of them. Over the next 6 months, the wedding planning became a group project that brought together everyone Catherine loved. Grace insisted on helping with the dress, dragging Catherine to a dozen boutiques before they found the dress that made Catherine feel like herself but elevated, like the best version of who she was. It was simple and elegant, ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate lace at the shoulders and a train that whispered against the floor like secrets, like promises. When Catherine put it on and looked in the mirror at the final fitting, Grace burst into tears. "You look like joy," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, like pure joy made visible, like everything beautiful in the world concentrated into one person. Sophia handled logistics with the precision she brought to her work at Project Phoenix, creating spreadsheets and timelines and backup plans for the backup plans, making sure every detail was perfect, that nothing was left to chance. She chose her bridesmaid dress in a dusty rose that complemented her skin beautifully, and recruited Elena and two other women from Project Phoenix to be bridesmaids as well, creating a wedding party that represented the family Catherine had built from the ashes of her destroyed life. Elena arranged flowers, drawing on her Eastern European roots to create something that looked like a garden had been convinced to attend a wedding, like spring itself had decided to celebrate. Roses and peonies and delicate green things that smelled of hope and new beginnings. Linda Chen, surprisingly, took over the music, revealing a secret passion for classical composition that none of them had known about, that she had kept hidden during her years of managing a restaurant when she should have been doing something that used her full intellect. She created a playlist that moved from classical to jazz to modern, that took guests on a journey through different emotions, different moods, different ways of expressing love through sound. And through it all, James was patient and present, showing up for tastings and fittings and the thousand small decisions that went into creating one perfect day. His children flew in from California, a daughter and a son in their 20s, and they welcomed Catherine with the kind of warmth that said they wanted their father to be happy, more than they wanted to protect old wounds, that they could see what she meant to him, and were grateful someone could make him smile again. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late spring, when the Brooklyn brownstone garden was bursting with flowers that Grace had been cultivating for months, had been planning and planting with the kind of care that only a mother planning her daughter's wedding could bring. The garden where Catherine had played as a child, where her father had taught her to read in 3 languages, where she had cried when her world collapsed, and where she had learned to stand again. The day arrived warm and perfect, the kind of May morning that felt like a gift, like the universe had decided to cooperate with human joy. Catherine woke in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by Sophia and Elena and her bridesmaids, all of them helping her get ready, helping her with her dress and her hair and her makeup, creating the kind of chaos that comes from women who love each other preparing for something important. "You're getting married," Sophia said, her voice filled with wonder as she fastened Catherine's necklace, her hands gentle and sure. "You're actually getting married. A year and a half ago you were serving soup. Now you're marrying the most perfect man and running a company that helps women and changing the world. I'm so proud of you I could cry. Actually, I am crying. Ignore me." "I'm crying too," Elena admitted, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You look like a queen. You look like everything good that can happen to a person who refuses to give up." Catherine looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked happy. She looked whole. She looked like someone who had been broken and had healed stronger, like scar tissue that was tougher than the original skin, like someone who had learned that falling wasn't failure, staying down was. The ceremony took place in Grace's backyard, in the garden where Catherine had grown up, where every flower and tree held memories of her father, where the ghosts of her childhood played among the roses. 50 guests filled the white chairs arranged on the lawn, 50 people who mattered, who had helped build this moment, who had supported Catherine through her fall and her rise. Grace walked her down the makeshift aisle, because that was what mothers did when fathers were gone, because Grace had been both parents for the last 5 years, because no one else could fill that role, could hand Catherine over to her future, with the same mixture of joy and sadness and fierce protective love. Grace wore her best dress, periwinkle blue with delicate beading, and her brightest smile, though tears streamed down her face from the first step. When she placed Catherine's hand in James's, when she performed that ancient ritual of one generation trusting another with their most precious treasure, she whispered just loud enough for them both to hear, "Take care of my girl." "Always," James promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Always and forever." The officiant was a retired judge who had been friends with Catherine's father, who remembered Catherine as a little girl bringing him cookies and asking him questions in 3 different languages, testing herself, showing off, delighting in the magic of words. He smiled at her now, at the woman she had become. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice carrying across the garden, where bees hummed and birds sang, and life continued in its beautiful ordinary way, even as something extraordinary was happening. To witness the marriage of Catherine Morrison and James Chen, Two people who have known loss and found each other. Two people who have been broken and chose to heal together. Two people who understand that love is not about finding someone perfect, but about choosing someone completely, flaws and scars and all. The vows were simple. No grand declarations or flowery poetry, just truth spoken plainly between two people who knew exactly what they were promising. James, Catherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. You taught me to trust after betrayal, to hope after despair. You taught me that love doesn't have to be loud or dramatic or perfect to be real, that sometimes the best love is quiet and patient and built on friendship and respect, and the choice to see each other clearly and choose each other anyway. You waited while I figured out how to be whole again. You never rushed me. You never demanded more than I could give. You just loved me, scars and all. I choose you, today and every day after. I choose you completely. Catherine, James replied, his eyes bright with unshed tears, his architect's hands steady as they held hers. You taught me that falling isn't failure, staying down is, that grace is stronger than anger, that the bravest thing we can do is let someone see us completely and trust they'll stay. You never stayed down. You got up every time life knocked you down. You chose to build instead of burn, to love instead of hate, to be kind even when the world had been cruel to you. I will never leave. I will never stop choosing you. I will love you in success and in struggle, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for all the days of my life. They exchanged rings, simple platinum bands engraved with the date and a single word chosen together: Grace. Not just the name of Catherine's mother, but the concept itself, the decision to give love and forgiveness and second chances, even when they weren't earned, even when they were hard, even when revenge would have been easier. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, the judge said, his voice warm with affection for these two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their first lives. I now pronounce you married. You may kiss. The kiss was tender and sweet and witnessed by everyone who had helped build this moment, everyone who had supported Catherine through her darkest days and celebrated with her in her light. When they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, as partners in everything that came next, the applause was punctuated by Sophia's happy sobbing and Grace's joyful laughter, and the particular sound that comes from people who love each other, celebrating love. The reception was joy distilled into hours. Grace gave a toast that made everyone cry and laugh in equal measure, talking about the daughter she had raised, the woman Catherine had become, the choices that had brought her to this moment. To Catherine, Grace said, raising her glass with hands that shook slightly with emotion, who was lost and found herself, who was broken and became stronger, who was betrayed and chose compassion anyway. This is my daughter. This is my hero. This is proof that the darkest nights can lead to the brightest mornings if you just hold on long enough to see the dawn. Linda Chen toasted next, her voice gruff with emotion she usually kept hidden. To Catherine and James, to second chances and new beginnings, to the family we choose and the love we earn through showing up, through staying, through refusing to give up on each other even when giving up would be easier. May you build something beautiful together. May you support each other through whatever comes. May you remember on the hard days why you chose each other on this perfect one. Sophia's toast was characteristically enthusiastic, delivered through tears and laughter. To the woman who saw me when I was invisible, who taught me that intelligence is power, who showed me what it means to lift other women instead of competing with them. Kat, you're not just my boss or my mentor or my friend. You're my sister. You're my hero. You're proof that good things happen to good people if they just refuse to give up. I want to be like you when I grow up, even though I'm pretty sure that's impossible because you're literally perfect. And I love you so much I can't even properly express it, so I'm just going to stop talking now before I ugly cry all over this microphone. Catherine laughed through her tears, stood to hug each woman in turn, to hold them close and feel the weight of their love, the substance of the family she had built from nothing, from the ashes of her destroyed career and her broken heart, and her 3 years of being invisible. The first dance was to a song Linda had chosen, something classical and timeless that spoke of endurance and commitment and love that was built to last. Catherine and James moved together with the ease of people who had learned each other's rhythms, who fit together in ways that felt natural and right and meant to be. Halfway through, they were joined by Grace dancing with James's son, by Sophia dancing with her fiancé, by Linda dancing with her brother, by Elena dancing with the man she had met through Project Phoenix, another refugee from corporate betrayal, who understood her story because he had lived his own version of it. The garden filled with love and music, and the particular magic that happens when people who have survived find their way to celebration, when people who have known darkness choose to dance in the light. Later, after cake had been cut and toast had been made, and the comfortable chaos of family had settled into the gentle exhaustion of a long, beautiful day, Catherine found herself standing near the roses with James, both of them taking a quiet moment away from the celebration. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist, his warmth steady and solid beside her. "Happier than I knew was possible," Catherine admitted. "A year and a half ago, I was serving soup and plotting revenge. Now I'm married to you and helping women rebuild their lives, and I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Like everything that happened, all the pain and the betrayal and the 3 years of being nothing, it was all leading me here, to this moment, to you, to this life, to this." "The pain mattered," James said quietly. "It taught you things you needed to know, but you're not defined by it anymore. You're defined by what you built from it, by who you chose to become in the aftermath. That's what I love about you. Not that you survived, but how you survived, with grace and compassion, and the determination to make sure no one else had to suffer the way you suffered." They stood together in the garden where Catherine had grown up, where her father had taught her to love words, where her mother had taught her to love herself, where she had learned that home wasn't a place but a feeling, a collection of people who loved you unconditionally and believed in you even when you didn't believe in yourself. And Catherine thought about David Sterling, wondered briefly where he was, what he was doing in the federal prison, where he would spend the next 10 years for fraud and conspiracy, and the betrayal of everything he should have stood for. She had visited him once, 3 months after his conviction, in the sterile visiting room with its bulletproof glass and its telephone receivers. He had looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by orange prison garb and the weight of consequences. They had sat across from each other, separated by glass and years of history and choices that couldn't be unmade. "Why did you come?" he had asked, his voice hollow. "To tell you that I forgive you. You shouldn't. I don't deserve it." "I know, that's why it's called grace. I'm not forgiving you because you deserve it. I'm forgiving you because I deserve peace, because carrying hatred for you was poisoning only me, because I choose to let it go. Do you think I can change?" He had asked it like a child, like someone who genuinely didn't know if redemption was possible, if people could become better versions of themselves, or if you were locked into being whoever you had chosen to be in your worst moments. "I think everyone can change," Catherine had told him honestly. "But change isn't about what you say. It's about what you do. You have years ahead of you to figure out who you want to become. Use them wisely. Use them to become someone better than the person who framed me. Someone who builds instead of destroys. Someone who lifts people instead of crushing them." She had left feeling lighter, not because she believed David would change, but because she had finally let go of the weight of hating him, of needing him to suffer, of defining her worth by his punishment. She had chosen peace. She had chosen to move forward instead of being anchored to the past. Now, standing in her mother's garden on her wedding day, Catherine felt nothing when she thought of him. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just a distant compassion for a man who had destroyed others, while destroying himself, who had chosen power over integrity, and had lost everything that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, reading her the way he always did, seeing the slight distance in her eyes, the brief journey inward. "How far I've come, how different my life is from what I thought it would be, how grateful I am for every moment that brought me here, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones." "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Our guests are waiting. Your mother wants to dance with you, Sophia wants to give another toast, and I want to hold my wife and celebrate the fact that we get to spend the rest of our lives together." "Wife," Catherine said, testing the word, feeling how it fit. I'm someone's wife, I'm married. That's still so strange and wonderful. Get used to it, Mrs. Chen. I'm keeping Morrison professionally. Morrison Chen, maybe. I worked too hard to reclaim that name to give it up completely. Whatever you want. You're Catherine Morrison, Catherine Chen, Catherine Morrison Chen, or just Cat to the people who love you. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the woman who wears it. They walked back to the reception hand in hand, back to the celebration, back to the family waiting for them. And Catherine thought about the girl she had been at 25, brilliant and ambitious, and certain that success was measured in titles and salaries and the respect of powerful men. She thought about the woman she had been at 31, destroyed by betrayal, her world in ashes, her future blank. She thought about the woman she had been at 34, serving soup and plotting revenge, and forgetting what hope felt like. And she looked at the woman she was now, approaching 40, scarred but whole, powerful but gentle, successful but grounded, married to a man who loved her completely, running a program that helped women rebuild their lives, surrounded by family, by love, by the kind of meaning that came from using your gifts to serve others instead of just yourself. The fall had been necessary. The breaking had been necessary. The 3 years of being invisible had been necessary because they had taught her what mattered. They had shown her who she really was when everything else was stripped away. And who she was, it turned out, was someone who chose grace, who chose love, who chose to build instead of burn. 5 years passed like pages turning in a beloved book, like chapters unfolding in a story that kept getting better instead of worse. Catherine and James bought a loft in Chelsea, modern and full of light, with enough space for his architecture books and her linguistics journals, and the life they were building together. They spent weekends at a small house in the Berkshires, a refuge from the city where they could garden and read and simply be, where they could remember that they were more than their work, that life was meant to be lived, not just achieved. Grace turned 70 and showed no signs of slowing down. She volunteered at Project Phoenix 3 days a week, mentoring younger women, sharing her wisdom about resilience and grace, and the choice to get back up after falling. She babysat Sophia's daughter, a bright-eyed toddler named Grace after her, who called her Grandmother Grace, and brought her dandelions from the park, who was growing up surrounded by strong women, who would teach her that she could be anything, could survive anything, could rise from anything. Linda Chen became CEO of Blackwell Industries when Marcus finally retired, the first woman to hold that position, and she transformed the company culture completely. 60% of the staff was now female. Mentorship programs were mandatory for all senior leadership. Zero tolerance for discrimination or harassment was enforced ruthlessly, with immediate termination for violations. The company thrived under her leadership, proving what Catherine had always known, but what the world had needed to see demonstrated. Competence had no gender. Excellence had no gender. Power wielded with wisdom and compassion had no gender. Sophia, now 29 and a mother, ran the marketing division with creativity and precision. She had published a book about women in business, about resilience and sisterhood, and the power of lifting each other up. She had dedicated it to Catherine with words that made Catherine cry every time she read them. To the woman who taught me that falling is not failing, and that grace is the strongest power in the world. To my sister, my mentor, my hero. Elena was engaged to be married herself, to a man she had met at one of Project Phoenix's networking events, another survivor of corporate betrayal who understood what it meant to rebuild, who knew that broken didn't mean worthless, that scarred didn't mean weak. She ran Eastern European operations with the same brilliance that had once made her invisible, and she mentored 3 younger women, paying forward what Catherine had given her, continuing the cycle of grace compounding. And Project Phoenix had grown beyond anyone's wildest imagination. What had started as Catherine's personal crusade, her way of turning pain into purpose, had become a movement. 125 women helped in 5 years, an entire network of female professionals supporting each other, hiring each other, lifting each other up. What had started small had grown into something that was changing the landscape, that was creating a world where being brilliant and female didn't make you a target, where competence was celebrated instead of punished, where women didn't have to claw their way up alone because they had sisters watching their backs. The organization had expanded beyond Blackwell, had become its own nonprofit with major funding from corporations that wanted to be on the right side of history, that wanted to prove they valued talent regardless of gender. Catherine had given a TED Talk about second chances and grace that had been viewed 5 million times. Women from across the country reached out, sharing their stories of betrayal and blackballing, asking for help, offering to volunteer, wanting to be part of something bigger than themselves. Catherine, approaching 40, had found a balance between work and life that she never thought possible when she was 25 and grinding herself into dust for achievement. She still consulted for Blackwell, still ran Project Phoenix, but she also took Sundays off completely, spent them with James and Grace and her chosen family, cooking elaborate meals and playing board games and doing nothing productive except loving each other. She had learned that rest was not weakness, that joy was not frivolous, that the most important work she did was not in boardrooms, but in moments of connection, of grace given and received, of love sustained over time, through the choice to show up, to stay, to be present. One Friday evening in early autumn, 5 years after her wedding, Catherine and James decided to celebrate their anniversary by returning to the Meridian. It had become a tradition, this annual pilgrimage back to the place where everything changed, where Catherine had been invisible and had chosen to be visible, where she had spoken truth to power and had changed the trajectory of her life. They were seated at a good table by the window, the same table where James had proposed 5 years ago when they had been just beginning, when the future had been uncertain but hopeful. The Meridian looked exactly the same. White linen, crystal chandeliers, the quiet hum of wealth and power. But Catherine felt completely different walking through it. She wore a simple dress, held James's hand, smiled at the hostess with the ease of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to be. Their server approached, a young woman with nervous energy and careful movements, with the particular stillness of someone trying to be invisible. Her name tag read Maria. "Good evening, I'm Maria, and I'll be your server tonight. May I start you with some water for the table?" Catherine looked at her and immediately saw it. Saw herself 5 years ago in this woman's careful posture, in the intelligence she was hiding, in the competence she was diminishing, in the way she moved like someone who was afraid of being seen, who had learned that invisibility was safer than visibility, that being nothing was better than being punished for being something. "Sparkling for me, please," James said, his voice warm and kind, because he was always warm and kind, because that was who he was. "Still for me, thank you," Catherine added, then gently, with the tone that she used when she wanted to make someone feel safe. "Your accent is beautiful. Venezuela?" Maria's eyes widened, surprise breaking through the professional mask for just a fraction of a second. "Yes, ma'am. You have very good ear." "I speak a little Spanish," Catherine said, switching languages with the ease of breathing, with the skill that had defined her life. "What did you do in Caracas before you came here?" Maria hesitated, clearly weighing whether truth was safe, whether honesty would hurt her. "I was teacher, literature, at university." "What happened?" Another pause. Then quietly, carefully, with the shame of someone who thought they deserved what had happened. "Political situation, I had to leave, had to start over." Catherine felt the familiar ache of recognition, of seeing yourself in someone else's suffering. Another brilliant woman, another refugee from circumstances beyond her control, another invisible person waiting to be seen. After Maria left to put in their orders, James looked at Catherine with knowing eyes. "You're going to help her," he said. Not a question, a statement, an acknowledgement of who his wife was, of what she did, of how she moved through the world, seeing people who needed to be seen. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who loves you," James said, squeezing her hand. "Only to someone who's watched you do this over and over for 5 years. You can't help yourself. You see someone who needs help and you help them. It's who you are. It's why I love you." After dinner, When Maria brought the check, Catherine asked to speak with her privately. The younger woman approached with the wariness of someone who had learned that attention from wealthy diners was usually dangerous. "Is something wrong with the service, ma'am?" "No, the service was perfect. Please, sit for just a moment." Maria sat on the edge of the chair, ready to flee, her hands trembling slightly. Catherine recognized that trembling, had felt it herself so many times. "I used to work here," Catherine said gently, in Spanish, giving Maria the gift of her native language. "5 years ago. I was a server, just like you. I spoke 10 languages, and I served soup to people who never saw me as human, who treated me like furniture. I know what it's like to be invisible, to have skills that nobody recognizes, to start over in a country that doesn't understand what you've lost, or who you were before you lost everything." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be lying." Catherine pulled a business card from her purse, the Project Phoenix card with her direct number, and the organization's mission statement printed on the back. She placed it on the table between them like a promise, like a bridge from one life to another. "This is my organization. We help women who have been displaced, who need second chances, who deserve to use their brilliance instead of hiding it. I'd like you to call me on Monday. We can talk about opportunities, about helping you get your life back, about remembering who you were before the world made you invisible." "But why?" Maria whispered, staring at the card like it might disappear. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because 5 years ago, I was you," Catherine said, her voice filled with the weight of experience, with the knowledge earned through suffering and healing. "I was exactly you. And someone helped me, several someones. Sophia, who became my sister. Linda, who saw me when I was nothing. My mother, who never stopped believing in me. James, who loved me back to life. They gave me a chance when no one else would. Now it's my turn to give you that chance, to pay forward what was given to me, to keep the cycle going." She stood, left a generous tip, left the card on the table like a talisman. James put his arm around her waist as they walked out of the Meridian into the autumn evening, the city alive around them with possibility. "You're building an army," James said, the same thing he had said 5 years ago. "I'm building a family," Catherine corrected, the same answer she had given then. "There's a difference. Armies fight, families lift each other up, armies have casualties, families have sisters. And everyone deserves to find their sisters, to discover that they're not alone, that invisible doesn't mean powerless, that broken doesn't mean worthless." On Monday, Maria called. By Tuesday, she had an interview with Project Phoenix. By Friday, she had a job teaching literature courses at a community college that partnered with the organization, teaching Venezuelan refugees and immigrant students, using her expertise, being seen again. By the end of the month, she was mentoring 2 other Venezuelan women, helping them navigate the impossible maze of starting over, of rebuilding, of becoming visible again. And the cycle continued. Women helping women. Grace compounding across lives until it became its own kind of force, unstoppable and beautiful and exactly what the world needed, exactly what Catherine had needed 5 years ago when she was invisible and forgotten and thinking about giving up. Catherine Morrison, who had been nothing, who had been invisible, who had been destroyed and rebuilt, sat in her office one afternoon and looked at the wall of photos. 125 faces, 125 stories, 125 second chances. She thought about the girl she had been at 25, brilliant and ambitious, and certain that success was measured in titles and salaries and the respect of powerful men. She thought about the woman she had been at 31, destroyed by betrayal, her world in ashes, her future blank. She thought about the woman she had been at 34, serving soup and plotting revenge, forgetting what hope felt like. And she looked at the woman she was now, at almost 40, scarred but whole, powerful but gentle, successful but grounded. She had everything she had lost and more, a career that mattered, a marriage that sustained her, a family that loved her, a purpose that went beyond herself. But more than that, she had peace. The quiet, earned peace of knowing that she had chosen grace over revenge, building over burning, love over hate. The peace of knowing that her father would be proud, that her mother was proud, that the person looking back at her in the mirror was someone she could respect, someone she could love, someone who had fallen hard but had gotten back up stronger. The fall had been necessary. The breaking had been necessary. The 3 years of being invisible had been necessary. Because they had taught her what mattered. They had shown her who she really was when everything else was stripped away. And who she was, it turned out, was someone who chose grace, who chose love, who chose to build instead of burn, who chose to lift other women until everyone could fly. David Sterling had tried to destroy her, and he had, for a while. But in destroying her old life, he had forced her to build something better, something truer, something that would outlast both of them, that would continue long after they were both gone, that would change lives for generations. She picked up her phone and texted her group chat with Sophia, Linda, Elena, and Grace. "Dinner at my place Sunday? I'm cooking." The responses came quickly. Sophia sent heart emojis. Linda sent a thumbs up. Elena sent prayer hands. Grace called immediately. "What are we celebrating?" her mother asked. "Nothing special, just us, just family." "That's not nothing, baby, that's everything." And it was everything. This chosen family, this network of grace, this life built not on revenge or bitterness, but on the radical act of loving anyway, of forgiving anyway, of choosing light even when darkness would have been easier, of believing that broken could become whole, that invisible could become powerful, that grace could compound until it changed the world. Catherine Morrison, Doctor of Linguistics, Chief Risk Officer, founder of Project Phoenix, wife, daughter, sister, friend, stood in her corner office looking out at Manhattan and smiled. She had fallen. She had risen. She had learned the most important language of all, the language of grace, the language of second chances, the language of women who lift other women until everyone can fly. And that story, she knew, was just beginning. Because every woman helped became someone who helped others. Because every act of grace created more grace. Because the cycle she had started would continue long after she was gone, would touch lives she would never meet, would change the world in ways she couldn't predict. She had been invisible, she had been nothing, she had been destroyed, and she had become everything that mattered. Not because she had destroyed her enemy, though justice had been served. Not because she had reclaimed her career, though her reputation had been restored, but because she had chosen, in the aftermath of betrayal and loss and 3 years of invisibility, to become someone who made the world gentler, kinder, more just. Someone who proved that the most powerful revenge was living well and lifting others as you rose. Someone who showed that broken didn't mean finished, that fallen didn't mean defeated, that invisible didn't mean powerless. Someone who chose grace, always grace. And that choice, that simple, radical, revolutionary choice, had changed everything.